Chapter 1. Prologue. Chapter Text. Even without a quirk, can I still be a hero, like you? Midoriya Izuku, a quirkless teenager with seemingly no other special skills other than hero analysis, almost couldn't comprehend how the situation turned out like this. He had a really shitty day, no thanks in part to his childhood friend-turned-bully, but Kugu Katsuki, telling him to end his life if he so desperately wanted a quirk. Then, he was almost killed by a sludge villain on his way home. Just when he thought that his life was coming to an end anyway, his childhood idol, the #1 hero in the country, All Might, came to his rescue. What should have been the end of that did not, as in desperation, Midoriya latched onto the hero's leg as he took off into the air, throwing his life into a second near-death experience in less than 5 minutes. For both of their safety, All Might landed on the roof of a building in the downtown core, and to Midoriya's shock, deflated into his true, emaciated form as Toshinori Yagi. Shock aside, realizing that he might never get another chance like this again, Midoriya asked the #1 hero the question that has been plaguing him since his diagnosis as quirkless. The answer that came would forever alter his life. I'm sorry, kiddo, you can't be a hero without a quirk. You can't be a hero without a quirk. You can't, without quirk. You can't. You can't. You can't. Those dreaded words, said with pity, repeated themselves over and over in Midoriya's head, long after he excused himself from All Might's presence and left the building. His own childhood idol, the symbol of peace whom he had looked up to ever since he was a toddler, had destroyed his dreams, with such audacious pity that it made Midoriya nauseous, although that could also be attributed to the loud, heaving sobs that racked him when he numbly found himself at a small park and sat himself down on a bench. It would have been heart-wrenching for anyone to hear such sobs, and indeed it was. For Midoriya, the world had collapsed all around him. The one hope that he had for his dream had been severed. There was nothing left. All Might was just another figure, part of a long line of people who had shown him pity, or worse, disgust, for not having a quirk. There were 3 that stood out in prominence. I'm sorry, but with the extra toe joint, it's irrefutable that Izuku would never have a quirk. That was his family doctor, stoic and professional, diagnosing him as quirkless. I'm so sorry, Izuku. That was his mother, the only family he had left after his father left without a word, breaking down in tears when he, amidst his own tears, asked futilely if he could be a hero like All Might after that fateful medical appointment. He still remembered his mother embracing him as they both cried in his darkened bedroom, the only light coming from the computer screen featuring a smiling All Might. If you're so desperate for a quirk, useless Deku, go and take a leap of faith off the roof. Hopefully, you'll get a quirk in your next life. That was Kaken, or Bakuga Katsuki, childhood friend-turned-bully. The explosive blonde had been the source of many more insults and physical attacks, those of which Midoriya had already forgotten in an attempt to numb the pain of daily life. But those 2 sentences, spoken just hours before with such cruelty that it was almost impossible to believe that a human could possess such levels of malice, remained crystal clear in Midoriya's head. And now, All Might had joined the list. Pain. Unbearable, agonizing pain. That was what Midoriya felt now. He was bleeding out, emotionally, as if he had been stabbed 1,000 times and left to die. Indeed, he felt like he was dying. Everything that meant his very existence had been destroyed. There was nothing left to help him become the person he wanted to be. He was just Deku. Useless, quirkless Deku. Amidst his sobs, a scream retches out of his throat as his emotional casket explodes. It dies away into more hiccuped sobs as the rush of emotion ebbs away, leaving behind an empty void never to be filled again. Slowly, the sobs too fade away as the green-haired teen ran out of tears to cry. He sits for a while more, heaving deeply to replenish the oxygen that he had been slowly depriving his lungs of from his sobs. Only when his breathing stabilizes does Midoriya attempt to stand back up. He wavers, his legs numb from the lack of movement. Once he steadies, he looks up to the sky. What should have been the blue sky of the early evening with a smattering of yellows and orange from the setting sun was instead an ominous dark gray. The wind was picking up, as the clouds seemed to roll above the teen. A thunderstorm was coming. courtesy of a quick flash of light amidst the clouds, followed closely by a low rumble. Midoriya felt a strange crackling in the air, his curly locks unknowingly rising and standing on end. Gosh, I better get back before I dash. He was unable to finish that thought, for all of a sudden, there was a flash of blinding light. And then pain. Midoriya felt his entire body seize up, followed by an ear-splitting scream. He didn't know it at that moment, but that scream was ringing from his own mouth. All he could see was white, a glaring, blinding white light. The pain was excruciating. It was like as if 1,000 knives were stabbing at every inch of his body. Every nerve ending seared as if they were on fire, just as physical fire began to erupt from the seams of his gakurin and the tips of his hair. Midoriya felt his heart go haywire, beating faster and erratically, as his lungs felt like they were going to implode. It was an eternity of agony, when it had happened almost instantaneously and ended just as quickly. Time appeared to slow, amidst unbearable pain. Suddenly, the white light vanished, leaving behind a vision of blurred, merging shapes and colors. Then came the seemingly slow descent towards the ground. Midoriya felt many things as he keeled over. He felt his lungs collapse and his breathing fade, an incessant ringing in his ears, his vision becoming blurrier and darker, the small flames that singed his hair and uniform, the leftover pain that still coursed through his fried nerves, his heart reaching breaking point, pulse fluctuating madly, before it slowed and stopped. That was also the same moment his body hit the ground with a dull thud. And not a moment later came the rain, first a droplet, then two, and then three, followed by more. Within seconds, a deluge of water poured from the heavens, splattering on Midoriya's body, now riddled with Lichtenberg scars running all over, crisscrossing and branching all over, from throughout his face to the tips of his fingers. The small flames that singed his hair and clothes fizzled out, defenseless against the watery onslaught. There he laid, prone against the rain, unnoticed by anyone as they rushed for shelter underneath umbrellas, newspapers, or bags. A minute passes, and there was another rumble of thunder, followed by another flash of light. Midoriya's body involuntarily jerked as a second bolt of lightning struck him directly over his silent heart. Thunder followed, almost instantaneously, with a deafening crash and roar. The noise faded, but the bolts of electricity from the second strike didn't. It crackled wildly within him, centering on a certain spot in between his lungs, where a dull mass of energy laid. Sparking with the currents, the mass glowed, losing its dull shade for brightness. The electricity then shot towards his heart, before spreading along the silent arteries and veins of his body. Every organ, muscle, bone, nerve, and tendon were all enveloped by the electricity. Midoriya's brain, the last remaining organ to have not yet shut down from the fatal first strike, was the last to be taken over by the crackling bolts. All the while, green bolts of electricity pulsed and crackled all over his prone form, the Lichtenberg scars glowing a jade-green color, starting from over his heart, traveling along, and ending at the tips of his fingers and toes. The electricity inside of him continued to pulse, getting fiercer over his heart, body, and mind. His chest started rising and falling slowly, oxygen steadily returning into his system. Then, all of a sudden, Midoriya's eyelids snapped open, revealing blank, dull eyes. The irises were no longer their forest green color. Instead, like the light pulsing along his scars, they were a jade green. A vibrant, beautiful color, but at the same time, desaturated and faded. As if there, but at the same time, not quite there. Still crackling with green electricity and glowing jade from his scars, Midoriya slowly picked himself up from the wet ground. He stepped over to where his bag lay, abandoned and drenched, picked it up, and slung it over his shoulder. And, with the rain still pouring down around him in torrents, Midoriya sauntered out of the park, as if he hadn't been struck dead by lightning and revived by the same force of nature less than a few minutes ago. Midoriya finally reached his apartment block. Heaven knows how much longer he took to make the journey thanks to the rain, and given the fact he sauntered all the way. During that time, he was struck by lightning again, no less than 5 times. But these strikes were different. Far different. Midoriya felt nothing whenever the lightning hit his body. Maybe the electricity coursing over his exposed skin and singed Gakurin and seeping into his body, but no pain or anything uncomfortable. All right, feeling the electricity being absorbed into his body was something he was unfamiliar with, but it wasn't bad per se. It was just unusual, but not unpleasant. Midoriya finally reached the front door. He pressed the doorbell, inadvertently draining the battery of its voltage into his system as he pulled his finger away, cutting the chime off halfway. He waited impassively as hurried footsteps raced for the door. It was quickly pulled open by his frantic mother, Inko. Izuku, oh my goodness, where were you? I tried calling you multiple times, and the storm outside was so ferocious and dash. Inko's words died in her mouth as she finally noticed the scars on her son, glowing green. Her eyes widened. Izuku W, what happened to you? The teen replied stoically as he raised a hand, crackling with green electricity. Honestly, I don't know. But Mom, this feeling. There was a beat of silence, raising the tension. I've never felt so alive, Mom. Chapter 2. Revelations and Beginning of Plans. Midoriya Inko was worried. It was 4:45. Her son should have been home more than an hour ago. But there was no sound of the doorbell ringing, no shouts of Mom, I'm home. And even if her son was going to be late coming home, he would have called her immediately. But no calls came, and all calls to her son's phone went unanswered. Furthermore, the sky had turned ominous by mid-afternoon, with the occasional flash and rumble in the distance. While Inko was sure Izuku had an umbrella in his backpack, that didn't stop the worry that continued to eat at her the longer time passed, with no sign of her son returning home evident. When it began to rain heavily, and the lightning and thunder getting stronger, Inko had half a mind to call the police to report her son's disappearance. But she stood fast to her belief that Izuku is capable of taking care of himself, and was making his way home as she marinated her worries. The doorbell suddenly ringing snapped the tension within Inko. She rushed for the door, not registering that the chime cut itself off before it could finish. Quickly peeking through the peephole, Inko felt her heart settle, seeing her son standing outside. She threw the door open, meeting a soaking wet Izuku. Izuku, oh my goodness, where were you? I tried calling you multiple times, and the storm outside was so ferocious and dash. Then, Inko noticed the glowing green Lichtenberg scars running all over her son's face. Her words died in her mouth. She stared in shock. Izuku W, what happened to you? Inko watched her son raise a hand, green bolts of electricity crackling and running up and down from his fingers and lower arm. Honestly, I don't know. But Mom, this feeling. Her son trailed off, while her own eyes trailed over his singed Gakurin and hair, both drenched from the rain. I've never felt so alive, Mom. Midoriya could tell his appearance short-circuited his mother's brain. He didn't blame her. He was just as unclear as she was. But nothing was going to get cleared up if they were going to just stare at one another, unmoving, not doing anything. Mom, I'm soaked. Let me shower first. I'll explain what happened afterwards. Still stunned by the proceedings, Inko could only silently nod, moving out of the way to let her son enter the apartment. Midoriya sauntered towards the bathroom, leaving Inko behind and a trail of wet footprints, each crackling with a tiny bolt of electricity. Several moments passed before the cogs in Inko's brain started working again. I think I'll make a cup of tea for Izuku and myself. Her mind set, Inko hurried to the kitchen to get the kettle going. However, just as she started the stove and placed the kettle on the ring, there was a loud boom. Inko jumped away from the stove on instinct. The loud noise was followed by something metallic banging against something, then what sounded like electricity going off. And then, the kitchen, no, the entire apartment, plunged into darkness, the fire in the stove ring extinguishing itself at the same time. Momentarily stunned by the sudden loss of power, Inko quickly reached for the drawers, rummaging through them for a torchlight. Finding one, she turned it on, a single beam of light piercing the darkness. Sorry. Inko spun around, aiming the torchlight at the monotonous voice. Against the beam of light stood her son, dripping wet, scars still glowing over his exposed body, electric bolts crackling like nobody's business, and a towel wrapped around his private areas. Should have known taking a shower while still pulsing with electricity was a bad idea. Once Midoriya had dried off, put on some fresh clothes, given rubber kitchen gloves to wear as precautionary protection by his mother, and the electrician called to come down and fix the blown-up fuse box, mother and son sat in the living room, still without power, the only source of light coming from the window, where the rain still poured beyond. A few moments passed in silence. Izuku, what happened? Midoriya glanced at his mother stoically, her irises reflecting the low light from the window. He could see all kinds of emotions in those forest green pools, worry, fear, confusion being the main ones. Let me start from the beginning, Mom. Midoriya recounted everything, starting with the attack from the sludge villain, which horrified Inko, All Might rescuing him. Here, Inko was surprised that her son's idol had saved him. His second near-death experience clinging onto the number one hero's leg as he took off into the air. This horrified Inko, again, and All Might telling him that he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. Hearing this, Inko's expression fell, her eyes becoming watery. Izuku, I'm so sorry. Nonplussed, Midoriya continued, There's more. Wiping away the tears in her eyes, Inko listened as her son carried on. She was left speechless with horror when Midoriya described getting struck by lightning after retreating to a park to cry, recounting the unbearable pain and the surreal feeling of his body shutting down, one organ after the other. Then, how were you revived, Izuku? I think I was struck by a second bolt, Midoriya replied. I felt the impact, but it was different. I felt the electricity seep into my body. Something opened up inside me, and then everything began to lighten. Suddenly, I could breathe again, and then my eyes opened. A moment of silence followed. Only the rain pouring outside provided some ambience. How do you feel now? Honestly, I feel normal, Midoriya replied. Like the electricity has become a part of me. I can't control it, but it's there. Again, silence followed. Inko, in all honesty, had no idea how to go about this. Her son had just been killed, then resurrected, and now possessed what could be electric or lightning quirk. Things happen one after the other, so quickly. It left her no chance to make head or tail of things. I think we should go see a specialist, Inko suggested. Maybe we can find some answers from them. If that works, Midoriya shrugged. But what about the electrician? He can only come tomorrow, his mother replied. Let's go, dear. Inko got up from the sofa, her son following immediately. Suddenly, the teen stopped. Actually, Mom, there's something I need to say. You can tell me as we go, dear, Inko replied as she grabbed her purse. What is it about? Here, Midoriya hesitated, eyes glancing downwards for a moment. Steeling himself, he continued. It's about Casey. It's about Bakugo. It was a miracle that Midoriya and his mother were able to get to the hospital in one piece. Why? Because while on the road, Midoriya spilled the beans on all of the bullying, insults, physical abuse, and ostracizing he was forced to endure for the past 10 years at the hands of his former childhood playmate and his lackeys, all because he was quirkless. He even confessed how Bakugo told him to kill himself if he so desperately wanted a quirk. His mother, expectedly, flew into a shocked outrage. In part due to the rain, they had several near accidents when Inko's disbelief and fury made her almost lose control of the wheel. Would-be collisions, rear ends, and sideswipes with other vehicles, trees, lampposts, pedestrians, and the like were barely avoided as the car swerved and braked through the wet streets. Midoriya was able to talk his mother down from an interrogation until they got to the hospital, which ensured their safe arrival. Now, after registering, mother and son sat in the half-filled waiting room, and the expected interrogation, albeit hushed since they were in a public place, began. How long has this been going on? Since the diagnosis that I was quirkless, Mom. Didn't you tell anyone? A teacher. I tried. Nobody listened. Nobody cared. Why didn't you tell me? Here, Midoriya hesitated. His brow furrowed slightly. I didn't wish to be a further burden. It was a cliched answer, When victims of bullying are asked why didn't they go to their parents or adult figures for help. But Inko understood it just as well as any other reason. Things hadn't been smooth since her husband walked out on them when her son was diagnosed as quirkless. Between raising her son and working to keep them afloat financially, she couldn't be there for him all the time. Furthermore, Midoriya had always been an independent child, always wanting to take control of the situation himself without any help. It made sense that Midoriya kept this terrible secret hidden for so many years. But at the same time, it broke Inko's heart to hear of the pain her son had to go through alone. "I'm so sorry, Izuku. I wish I could have been there for you more often." "It's not your fault, Mom. The world isn't perfect. We can't have everything that we want." Hearing her son speaking in such calm tones temporarily abated the barely repressed urge to storm to the Bakuga household and literally tear apart that piece of explosive shit for harming her son for so long. Brutal revenge aside, though, the main priority was her son and how they were to go about the current situation. The number on an overhead LED screen flashed Midoriya's number slip. The door to the specialist's office opened. A middle-aged man with receding hair poked his head out into the room. "Midoriya-san." Mother and son got up from their seats. The specialist opened the door wider, letting them in and closing the door behind them. "Now, what seems to be the matter?" Inko needed no further prompting. My son appeared to have developed a quirk quite suddenly. "Really?" The specialist, a Dr. Kajakura, started writing on a pad as he turned to Midoriya. "How old are you?" 15. "That's extremely late," Dr. Kajakura remarked. "Could you tell me what happened?" Midoriya repeated the story, save for the emotional bits. The more he recounted, the higher Dr. Kajakura's eyebrows rose. By the time he had finished, the good doctor was left completely floored. "Remarkable. Extremely remarkable." "What is it, Kajakura-san?" Inko asked. "By all accounts, your son should have been dead. But instead, he is alive and well, and the lightning has given a quirk through external means." "Has this happened before?" "Yes, but extremely rarely. There have been a few recorded cases of people getting their quirks from external circumstances rather than the usual manifestation at the average age of 4. But these are usually man-made events. Your son could be the first case where the external manifestation is from nature itself. This, Midoriya-san, is unprecedented, and if I have your consent, I would like to perform a few tests with your son to determine the nature of his quirk." Inko hesitated, glancing at her son, who just shrugged nonchalantly. "All right, you have my consent." What followed was a series of practical and medical tests to determine the nature of Midoriya's new quirk. The practical tests were painful, not for Midoriya, but for Dr. Kajakura, as the teen had no control of his new quirk when the gloves came off. However, it was the medical scans that provided the most shock. After nearly electrocuting the doctor over a dozen times, Midoriya underwent a full-body X-ray scan, which left Dr. Kajakura stumped. Further tests like pulse measurement and reflex gauging exacerbated the man's bewilderment. "I'm at a loss for words, Midoriya-san. What did you find?" "Your son is living off electricity." There was a beat of silence. "Living off electricity?" Inko repeated. "Yes," Dr. Kajakura nodded. "The X-ray scan showed the inside of your son's body to be completely filled with electrical currents. As you can see here, the doctor pressed some keys on the keyboard attached to a screen, which popped up a video feed of Midoriya's insides. The currents are running throughout his body." "But what has this got to do with Izuku living off this electricity?" asked Inko. This is where things venture into the unheard of. Dr. Kajakura zoomed in on one of Midoriya's arteries. You can see the red blood cells moving as they would normally do, if you ignore the smaller bolts of electricity coursing through as well. But he zoomed out and focused on Midoriya's heart. "As you can see, your son's heart is not beating." "I beg your pardon?" "Your son's heart is completely still. No pulse whatsoever. In normal circumstances, he should have been dead. But it appears as if the currents are acting like a pacemaker, manually taking over the function of his heart. My guesses are that all of his other bodily functions, like breathing, and even his mental functions." Here Dr. Kajakura moved to the feed of Midoriya's brain, which was completely enveloped in crackling electricity, are also being stimulated by the electricity. Something clicked in Inko's mind, and she paled slightly. So you're saying? A grim look flashed over the good doctor's face. Your son will need to be careful. Although I am uncertain of the odds, if the electricity within your son's body were to run out, be it from quirk overuse or other means, his body would have no means of support to stay functioning, and he could die. Utter silence. How can we prevent this? Inko asked, with a hint of desperation. Short-term wise, Dr. Kajikura replied. Your son will need to have a constant supply of electricity or a voltage source to replenish any electricity that he uses. However, that is not viable long-term. At the same time, if we can look at this. The doctor moved the feed downwards to over Midoriya's chest. He pointed to an area in between his lungs, where it appeared to contain a glowing solid of energy where a good chunk of the electric bolts appeared to be coalescing within, before spreading out to the rest of his body. The scan was just barely able to pick it up. Judging from how the electric bolts are behaving, I believe this is the core where all the electricity is sourced. Now, we have had cases where a core is central to a person's quirk. Unfortunately, no two cores are the same, so we don't know much about them. The only defining characteristic that applies to all cores is that the more it is built, the stronger it becomes. I think in this case, building up the core is the only long-term plan to ensure your son's survival. The car ride home was a somber one. It was still raining, although the lightning and thunder appeared to have ceased. Traffic had gotten worse with the wet weather and the evening rush home, reduced to slow-moving congestions with horns blaring constantly. In contrast, all was silent with Midoriya and his mother. The older woman drummed her fingers against the steering wheel, while the teen stared off into space, glancing downwards. Dr. Kajikura's words hung heavily on them both. He had spoken about other things about what the electricity had done to Midoriya's body, but those paled in significance to the fact that the teen's body was now running literally on nothing but electrical currents. Inko, naturally, was in the midst of an emotional roller coaster. On the one hand, she was ecstatic that her son finally had a quirk to call his own. However, that joy was overshadowed by the worry that her son's life now depends on electricity, fear of what would happen should that electricity run out, and the underlying anger at a certain Bakugo Katsuki for being the catalyst for this entire debacle. Midoriya, on the other hand, was in deep thought. He was definitely unnerved that he was basically running on a finite reserve, like a human battery. But the notion itself didn't scare or intimidate him. On the contrary, it fascinated him that he resembled Frankenstein's monster in terms of function, using electricity to come alive. But unlike Frankenstein's monster, this electricity was now his to possess. He still had no idea how to control it, but wasn't that a possibility that could open so many doors for him? He could imagine how much he could do if he bent the electric currents keeping him alive into an immense power. Could he be a hero now then? Was the possibility now within reach? And yet, Midoriya felt something was not quite right. He couldn't put his finger on it, the feeling of unsettled emotion that was out of place amongst his rationalized thoughts. Midoriya looked up and did a double take. The suburb they were driving through was unfamiliar. This was clearly not the way home. Mom, where are we? We're going to see Auntie Mitsuki, Inko replied, eyes never turning away from the road. I need to have a word with her about Katsuki. Ah, so that's what it was. That's what was unsettling him. Midoriya stayed silent for several moments, before turning to his mother. Mom, pull over. The car stopped. The rain continued to pour outside, hitting the windscreen and getting swept away from the wipers. What's the matter, Izuku? There's no need to make a scene there, Mom. Let's go home. What are you talking about? What Katsuki did is beyond reprehensible. He shouldn't be allowed to continue going about unpunished like this, Inko countered with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. I know. I'm not refuting that, Midoriya countered stoically. But I have a different approach to this, and I wish for you to hear me out, Mom. Inko went silent, waiting to hear her son's reasoning. Bakugo is the kind of egotistical arsehole who does not get affected by scoldings or rebukes, the teen explained, looking out of the windscreen. Getting Aunt Mitsuki or yourself to scream at him will not do anything. He is so convinced that he is right, that he will never believe that he could be wrong. No, what is needed to punch a hole through his thick skull is something even more traumatic. Midoriya turned back to his mother. Earlier today, he told me to kill myself if I wanted a quirk. I've decided I'll give him what he wants. Inko's eyes widened. Izuku, you see can't mean dash. Not in that sense, Mom, Midoriya interrupted. But first, can I ask you? Relieved her son was not going to do anything rash, Inko waited for his question. What was your maiden name before you got married? Chapter 3, Plans in Motion. The rain lasted through the night, only stopping with the dawn of the new day, a Saturday. But the sky remained gray and ominous, casting a somber gloom over the suburbs. Midoriya got up as he normally would, but he knew this Saturday was far different from past weekends. Change was in the air. The status quo was about to be shaken up. Breakfast was a standard affair, but what should have been an entire day filing through blogs, videos, and social media following heroes and jotting furiously into notebooks, Midoriya had places to be. First, his middle school. It was admittedly a bit strange to see how empty the school was during the weekend, save for the administration staff who came in for a half day of work. Yet that little detail had no hold on the green-haired teen, who with his mother had a last-minute appointment with the school's principal concerning his enrollment. Basically speaking, Midoriya was pulling out of school. The meeting was short and impersonal, save for a question about his scars from the principal, for which Midoriya quite pointedly replied, "Considering how you never bothered to ensure students like me are safe from bullying and ostracizing, I find it quite surprising that you bothered to take an interest in my well-being just as I am planning to pull out of your godforsaken school," which pretty much summed up the entire purpose of their visit. No further questions were asked. Midoriya's name was removed from the school's database, and he was officially no longer a student. Leaving behind a rather scandalized principal, mother and son left and went on to their second destination, the citizen's registrar office. 2 hours later, Midoriya emerged with a new legal identity. Akatani Mikomo. Quirk, Green Lightning. Akatani was his mother's maiden name, and Mikomo came from a moment of inspiration sparked from a stock image of a thunderstorm over a turbulent ocean that randomly popped up with an online ad the night before. The process was swift and efficient, as with his withdrawal from his former school, and Akatani left the office with a new ID card and passport. But as with tropes, a new name must come with a new look. So it was to the hair salon after lunch. There, forest green gave way to a royal purple, and one hair-dyeing procedure later, Akatani returned home a different person. Now he could get to planning. There were 3 main priorities on Akatani's list. 1. Learn to control his quirk and expand on its uses. 2. Build up his body strength, stamina, and agility. And 3. Pass the UA entrance exam. And he had 10 months to accomplish all 3. Akatani devised a simple timetable to organize his plan for the entrance exam. 3 days, he would research on the abilities of electric quirk users, hero, and villain, find out how to build up his core, apply theoretical knowledge into practice, and hone up until both his quirk and core become second nature and an inseparable part of him. The remaining 4 days, exercise and workout, hard. His theoretical study commenced the moment he came home from the salon. He holed up in his room, listing down the names of every hero, pro and underground, and known villains who possessed electric-type quirks or quirks of a similar nature. After dinner, he went back to those names and broke down and analyzed the properties, strengths, weaknesses, and application of their quirks, organizing his notes into notebooks dedicated to common details. It was long past midnight when he finally convinced himself to go to bed. The next day saw Akatani make a trip down to the local library, bag filled with empty notebooks and a holder bursting to the brim with pens and mechanical pencils. He spent the entire day within the air-conditioned reading rooms, going through book after book on the history of quirks, research studies on electric-type quirks, and informational books on various martial arts, offensive and defensive styles, and how to combine one's quirk with one's fighting skills. Akatani was, unfortunately, forced to leave when the library closed for the night. But that didn't mean he was going home empty-handed. He loaned out the 10 books he hadn't been able to cover during the day and went home with a much heavier bag. While it certainly was a struggle for Akatani's scrawny frame, it did make him think about the best places for him to work out and build his muscle mass. Gym memberships were expensive investments, and he didn't want to add another financial burden on his mother. So what could he do? The bus Akatani was on took a left turn. He looked out the window, and the answer was right there, rushing past him. A beach. Well, if one was being generous, and decided to ignore the fact that it resembled more of a landfill with mountains of garbage than a beach. But for Akatani, this was the perfect place. The bus passed a moss-covered, weather-beaten wooden sign. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. He'd better take note of the name, Akatani thought to himself. For the day after next, he'll be back. But before he could take on Dagoba Beach, there was one more important thing Akatani had to begin focusing on. His core. It was the very reason why he was alive today. It was therefore imperative that he find out everything he could about Quirk cores, for not just his future, but also for his very survival. Several of the books he brought back from the library were on Quirk cores, or whatever recorded information anyone has about cores, beyond what Dr. Kajakura had already mentioned. One book told of a legend that the first ever Quirk user had a core. Another listed the individuals who were said to possess cores, and what great, or terrible, deeds they went on to make. A lot of theories overlapped, supported or refuted one another. Some cores were benign and gentle, others were more violent and volatile. But there was widespread agreement on one thing. There was occasionally a core that gave its host an almost divine-like power. The sheer magnitude of such power was unimaginable to most, only described through the actions of the person who wielded them. But while this knowledge was good and all, what Akatani was looking for was information on how to control his core, integrate its power into his body and quirk, and be able to call upon it at will. That came from the last book in the pile, covers littered with creased lines and pages yellowed with time. Akatani began reading. The first exercise involved having first contact with one's core. Without this starting point, establishing a connection with it would be next to impossible. Easier said than done, though, since the instructions merely said, open your heart, open your soul, be one with what defines you. First contact with your core will be within reach. And when one gets vague instructions, you get a lot of failed attempts. Akatani tried all manner of means to open his heart and soul. Sitting in a lotus position under the running shower head, lying down on his bed with eyes closed, lying prone with eyes closed, standing dead straight with even breathing. All he felt was darkness, discomfort, mattress, and getting drenched. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I'm doing this wrong, he thought to himself as he stared up at his bedroom ceiling. But what is it? Seconds ticked by. Birds chirped outside the bedroom window. Akatani raised a hand over his face. A crackle of jade-green electricity bolted across his arm to his fingertips before disappearing. Maybe? It was worth a shot. Akatani relaxed his entire body as he laid back against the mattress. He closed his eyes, evened out his breathing, and tried to visualize the electricity coursing through him. For several minutes, nothing happened, but Akatani persisted. Finally, after 15 minutes of darkness, a small crackle of jade-green electricity dances across the void. Akatani mentally cheered before relaxing himself again. He had to repeat it multiple times until he got the hang of it. He tried again. The same crackle of electricity manifested itself again. He kept going, trying to expand the mental connection. Slowly, a second crackle joined the first, then a third, then a fourth. Akatani kept pushing, and eventually, the entire void was teeming with crackles of electricity, big and small. The field of electrical power seemed to expand bigger and bigger, until suddenly, it went supernova. For an undetermined amount of time, all Akatani could see was white. It persisted even when he opened his eyes. His room had vanished, only white as far as his eyes could see. Akatani realized he was lying on a hard surface, though it appeared to be nothing, just white. He slowly picked himself up and tried to orient himself with this unfamiliar realm he had just entered. What is this place? He took a step forward, feeling the hard surface underneath. Then another step. He was soon walking, but to where, he didn't know. He knew he was moving, but his surroundings remained the same, white all around, uninterrupted. Akatani didn't know how long he walked, but suddenly he stopped. Something, in the distance, interrupted the vast white. It looked like a green dot. Akatani sped up his steps. The closer he got, the bigger it became. At a close enough distance, he could make out what it was. It appeared to be a sphere made out of some clear, gelatinous-like substance. It was enveloped in a field of jade green, cracking electricity, sparkling underneath it. It hovered at about Akatani's chest level, unmoving. There was no doubt about it. This was his core. Akatani was enthralled by the sheer beauty of it. He reached out to his core, wanting to touch it, only for the sphere to start trembling, the electric currents crackling sharply. Akatani pulled his hand back, just as the sphere began shaking wildly, and the electric currents shooting out in all directions. There was a bright flash, and then his eyes flew open, and he was back in his room again. For several moments, he laid still on his bed, breathing hard from the rush that was now slowly leaving him like water flowing down the drain. He glanced about, checking to see if he was really back in the real world, before summoning the energy to sit up. He turned to the instructional book, lying idly on the floor beside his bed. Akatani picked it up and flipped to the next exercise. First contact will be volatile. Unfamiliarity remains dominant. Practice makes perfect, so too will the connection become. Well, looks like I have another reason to head down to Dagoba Beach tomorrow. The sun hadn't even begun to rise over the horizon into the new day, but already, a lone figure had gotten off the first bus at the stop closest to Dagoba Beach. In the silence of the early morning, Akatani hurried towards the polluted beach, backpack filled with packets of rubbish bags and rope. The sound of waves crashing against the shore and mountains of garbage greeted him as he arrived, seagulls cawing overhead. The teen stared at the years of accumulated waste and pollution in front of him. This was going to be a Herculean task, even more so since he only had 10 months to clean up the entire beach, and he wasn't the strongest person on the block. But if he wanted to get into UA, he had to do it. Sliding his backpack off, Akatani pulled out the first packet of rubbish bags. It was time to get to work. He started off with the piles furthest away from the water. Now, it would have been child's play to pick out the objects that were small and light. But Akatani wanted to test out a technique he learned from his research. Electrotelekinesis, or the ability to pull objects to him using his electrical currents. Many attempts followed, all unsuccessful. Sometimes, nothing came forth. Other times, only a crackle appeared. And a few times, the burst of electricity threw him backwards, but otherwise did nothing to the garbage. Akatani groaned, occasionally of pain, but he picked himself up after each failed attempt. He had to get this to work. But Akatani wasn't stupid or foolhardy. He knew that something was not quite right yet, as he resorted to manually picking up the smaller objects and tossing them into the rubbish bag. Thinking back to the day before and his failed attempt to connect with his core, he came to the conclusion that just like his core, his quirk itself was volatile and unstable. He had to continually use it to get a firm grasp of it, and perhaps along the way, he'll fully integrate himself with his core. As he set off for home at mid-afternoon, putting away 3 filled rubbish bags by the collection point, Akatani made a slight change in his schedule. He would devote a half-day to mental and emotional building, cutting back on his workout and cleaning days by the same amount. A week later, at last, there was some progress. Akatani's continuous practice has strengthened his control of his electricity to pick up small and lightweight objects, similar to how his mother's quirk worked. This advancement had also allowed for him to finally make contact with his core, albeit for only a single second. Nonetheless, it was a small victory to feel the smooth and crackling surface of his core for that moment. It spurred him further to become even better. As the days progressed, changes were made to his workout and cleaning routine. Instead of taking the bus, Akatani jogged to Dagoba Beach from his home and back. On the second week, a public gym opened 2 streets away from his home. Akatani would spend 2 days out of the 3.5 days dedicated to physical activity there, following a strict workout regimen he created from researching on the internet. The remaining time he would spend at Dagoba, moving on to bigger and heavier pieces of junk to clear away. Of course, Akatani wasn't able to come home completely unscathed all the time. When handling piles of rubbish that were at least twice his height, accidents were bound to happen. From unstable pieces of junk to small avalanches, Akatani had been lucky to come away with only bruises and scratches so far. But unless he planned for a way to dodge falling objects, it was only a matter of time before he would be risking serious injury or even death. And he would have gotten to that point had his instincts not unlocked another of his abilities in the moment of danger. Akatani was busy moving a broken rack out of a pile when suddenly he heard things falling and bouncing off one another. He looked up and almost shit his pants. The pile had become top-heavy, the weaker base giving way and crumbling under the weight of the top. Another avalanche was happening, only this time, heavy objects like broken electronics and large-sized items were raining towards him. Akatani felt his entire body seize up, seeing imminent death hurtling towards him. But just as he was about to be crushed from the falling trash, he felt his feet leave the ground. There was an immense crash as the junk landed onto the beach one after the other. Akatani watched the sand get kicked up in clouds as the rumble echoed out into the coast, followed by the sand clouds as they billowed out from the impact spot before dying back down, all from hovering several feet above the water, the lower half of his body enveloped in a sparking aura of green electric bolts. Huh, this should be interesting, Akatani thought to himself nonchalantly. The weeks bled into months, and many changes were taking place. Dagobah Beach was slowly, but surely, being cleaned up. The piles of trash slowly diminished as they disappeared, one by one, opening up the beach a little more with each passing day. Akatani was, by now, noticing the changes months of hard work had done to him. A combination of working out, jogging, pushing, pulling, dragging, and lifting trash of all sizes away has built his once scrawny form into defined, strong muscles. Once impossible to lift objects were now as easy to carry as if they were made of air. His stamina and agility had also vastly improved, honed from countless runs from home to the beach and back, dodging falling junk, and practicing martial arts moves at both the beach and the public gym. He let his hair grow out, letting his fringe fall over the right side of his face and tying up the back into a ponytail. He had also made significant advancements with his quirk. The months saw the improvement of Akatani's current abilities and the unlocking of new ones. He was now able to blow things apart with his electric bolts, though that is currently only limited to soft items like cotton or fabric. Hard items like metals were still being practiced. Manipulate the force and frequency of electrical attacks, from short bursts to long sweeps. Craft his electricity into shapes. Akatani figured a ball shape would be a good attack technique, and he was in the process of working out how to send his electricity to attack a wider area than just in one direction, and how to form shields with it, alongside using his electricity to fly, absorbing electricity from lightning strikes and power sources and reining it in so he didn't give others a nasty shock. But there was also one downside to this period of hard work and determination, namely, Akatani's emotions and socialization. The past months saw him having any meaningful conversation with only one person, his mother. Akatani saw no need for him to socialize with anyone else. After all, didn't no one want to have anything to do with him because he was quirkless? And even though he had a quirk, why bother wasting time socializing when the UA entrance exam was a bigger priority? It may have been mostly logic, with a hint of pettiness, but Akatani closed himself off socially from the world. In turn, his emotions stagnated and froze over, his heart grew cold, and his aura turned distant and unapproachable. But even if Akatani knew he was turning into an Ice King, he didn't give two hoots about it. All he cared about was cleaning up Dagobah and getting into UA. Finally, after months of arduous effort and back-breaking work, and only 3 days before the entrance exam, he was done. Akatani moved the last piece of junk, a broken refrigerator, to the trash collection point, just as the sun began to peek over the horizon. Tossing it onto the small pile of trash already there, he wiped the sweat from his brow and turned back towards the beach. It was beautiful. Light glistened against the calm surface of the water, changing shape with the waves as they rolled and splashed onto the shore. The sand sparkled under the same light like diamonds, amidst a vast plain of a light gold. The air smelled of spray and sea salt, no more of the rotting, putrid, foul odors from years of accumulated pollution. This was nature's creation at its finest, with nothing human to disrupt its beauty. Akatani hopped off to the pavement, sliding down to the sand. It felt clean now, unmarred by the filth that once piled high in this place. He stepped out halfway between the small slope and the water's edge, gazing silently out into the horizon as the sun continued its rise into the new day. He sat down onto the sand, eyes never leaving the sunrise. He felt accomplished, elated that he had reached his goal of cleaning up the beach. But he was also tired. He had gotten up in the early hours, when it was still dark, to get to the beach and clear away the last vestiges of garbage in time for the sunrise. Call him dramatic or sentimental, but Akatani wanted to catch the first rays of sunlight dawn upon the beach in its new, clean state, something that had never happened since the last time the beach was cleaned up. He just wanted some scenery, so sue him. Beautiful view or not, Akatani was exhausted. Feeling a bit off kilter, he laid back onto the sand. No sooner had he felt the shifting granules beneath him, he was out like the light. For several moments, all was still. Then came a relatively big wave. It crashed onto the shore, racing towards Akatani and splashing over him completely. As the wave receded, a single crackle of electricity jumped from his navel into the center of his chest where his core lay, followed by another one from his right arm, and another. Within seconds, his form was completely enveloped by crackling electricity as the world seemed to fade away. Akatani woke up. Immediately, he knew he was in the mystical plane where his core resided. But there was one crucial difference. All around him, where it should have been white, was filled with crackling bolts of his electricity, and they all appeared to be converging on one single spot. His core. This time, Akatani made no delay as he got up and followed the direction the electricity was crackling towards. Just as it had been in all the previous times he had traveled into this realm, the sphere that was his core was in the same spot. Only this time, all of the electric currents were converging into a bigger, spherical field around it. He felt completely familiar with the situation. He had lost count already, but at least once a day, he would slide into this plane and try to bond with his core over and over again. It had been slow going, but over time, his core had stopped shying away from him and propelling him back into the mortal realm. The connection allowed became longer, and Akatani had been able to hold it in his hands long enough to try and move it, but until now, that was all he was able to do before he was kicked out. Now, after honing his skills and strength for a full 10 months, he hoped it was enough for the core to accept him and bond with him completely. Slowly, Akatani reached forward. His hands gingerly passed through the electrical field and cupped the spherical shape of his core. Just like always, it felt smooth, like he was holding a crystal ball. So far, everything's fine. Then, he carefully retracted his hands, pulling the sphere out of the field. It phased through with no sudden movements. Once it had cleared through, Akatani hesitated, expecting to get thrown out of the realm, but nothing happened. Releasing a relieved sigh, Akatani stared at the glistening sphere in his hands and brought it into his chest. The moment it touched his skin, it started to glow. Startled, Akatani almost dropped the sphere as it, on its own accord, phased into his chest. The moment the sphere disappeared into him, the realm started to shift. The empty spherical field where the core once resided appeared to collapse into itself before bursting out in several different directions as individual electrical currents. They danced around wildly before converging onto Akatani's chest, on the exact same spot where the core had phased through earlier. The teen had no time to react, as the buildup of energy exploded in another supernova, tearing the realm apart in a flash of white. Meanwhile, the sleeping residents near Dagoba Beach were rudely shaken from their slumber, as a powerful burst of electricity exploded from a point on the beach and spread outwards in all directions in a shockwave of disruptive chaos. For several miles inland, fuse boxes exploded, electrical fixtures shattered, appliances hooked up to outlets burst into flames, wires melted, and whole systems like traffic lights went into overload and shut down. For the same radius out into the ocean, Any undersea life swimming too close to the surface was electrocuted and killed, their smoldering bodies floating to the surface and becoming the breakfast of thrilled seagulls. The shockwave dissipated, only for mayhem to take over. Smoke alarms went off, confused shouts and screams echoed as power to much of the district went down. Back at the beach, oblivious to the chaos he'd just caused, Akatani opened his eyes, once again breathing hard as the rush from seconds prior receded with the ocean's waves. Slowly, he picked himself up. Still dripping wet, he stared down at his hands. If what happened back in the realm meant anything. Akatani willed electricity to appear over his hands and arms. Almost immediately, the scars running along his arms glowed green, and crackles of electricity ran up and down the length. He then raised his arms out towards the ocean, compressing the electricity into balls, and on will, fired them out into the horizon. Watching the balls of electricity disappear into the distance, Akatani glanced back down on his hands and arms, still glowing and crackling with electricity. His lips twitched upwards the tiniest bit. He was heading for UA. Chapter 4. The Entrance Exam. The final 3 days before the entrance exam were spent going over notes and trying to calm his nerves. Akatani might have become ice-cold and unapproachable, but even he wasn't immune to the pre-exam jitters, at least inwardly. His mother, on the other hand, had no qualms against showing her own jitters, as she fretted over her son continuously, doing whatever was needed to ensure he was ready to take on the exam. Jitters or not, the day of the entrance exam came, and mother and son were having one last conversation before departure. "Just do your best, Mikumo," said Inko. "I'm confident you'll pass. And I'll be proud of you, no matter the outcome, okay?" "Okay, Oka-san," Akatani nodded. "Thank you for your support. I'll do my best." They shared one last hug, and with that, Akatani was off. The train ride to UA Station was a quiet affair. Akatani kept his still quivering nerves down by wiping his mind blank, envisioning a white plane as it appeared in the realm where he bonded with his core. It was when he alighted at the station and came within view of the towering campus of UA High School that Akatani allowed a tiny bit of awe to seep into his empty, emotional state. The colossal buildings that rose over the boundary walls glistened in the sunlight, standing proudly over the surrounding district. Students from all walks of life in different uniforms dotted the gates, waving to one another, chatting, or heading inside either alone or with friends. Akatani gazed upon the towering buildings for just a moment longer. Releasing a sigh, he joined the students heading inside. Until, as he casually glanced back, he noticed a familiar spiky-haired, explosive blonde trudging a few paces behind him. Bakugu. It had been 10 months since Akatani saw his former childhood friend. Bakugu still looked the same, perhaps a bit taller, but still the snarling, brash, foul-mouthed bully he had always been for the past decade. It made Akatani's stomach curdle in disgust, seeing the blonde. Bad memories threatened to flood his clean emotional state. He had to turn away, lest he lose control of his electricity and electrocute everyone along the path. Glancing down, Akatani noticed something innocuous. A broken piece of stonework from the path, large enough to slip someone up if they weren't careful. Why not? Akatani waited for Bakugu to get close enough. Then, discreetly, acting like it was a total coincidence, he kicked the broken piece of stone directly into the blonde's path, the smooth side in contact with the path. Not a moment later, Bakugu stepped on the stone, his foot sliding forward with it. And with a surprised yell, the blonde pitched backwards and fell onto his bum with a loud thud, followed closely by 2 small explosions when his hands smacked against the stonework path. Screams echoed. People jumped away in fright. Others turned around at the sound of the commotion. Akatani was at the base of the steps leading up to the doors when he heard the explosions. Turning back, he got a good look at the confused expression on his bully's face, staring dumbly ahead. He had to shove his fist in his mouth to stop himself from laughing. That became a lot harder when the surprised look turned into a snarling death glare, prompting those close enough to the blonde to flinch away. "Who the fuck tripped me?" Cue another set of explosions, and the onlookers stepped away further. Except for one brown-haired girl, who went up to Bakugu, hand outstretched. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help getting up?" Bakugu took one look at the concerned expression on the girl's face before his explosive ire was turned on her. The girl shrieked as the blonde let rip another explosion at her, singing her jacket as she stumbled back. "Like hell, I need your help, round face." Just like that, the urge to laugh died on Akatani, replaced by a sigh of exasperation. Bakugu really had not changed one bit. The purple-haired teen watched the blonde pick himself up, shout a "move it, fucking busybodies" at the stunned onlookers, and storm his way up towards the doors, not even noticing Akatani standing by the side watching him with withering look. And he wasn't the only one. Confusion had given way to glares, sneers, and disgust among the students who had witnessed the debacle. A few had turned to the brown-haired girl, asking if she was okay or needed to see a doctor. Akatani heard her reassure them that she was fine, but there undoubtedly hurt in her voice. He could only feel sorry for Bakugu and the path his current attitude was going to push him towards. But that's if he could, for Akatani had no emotional capacity for sympathy for the explosive blonde in the first place. Turning away from the aftermath, Akatani pushed a door open and stepped into the campus proper to find the room where the written exam was to take place. 2 hours later, Akatani emerged from the classroom turned examination venue a little bit worse for the wearer mentally. While he hadn't received any nasty surprises when the written exam commenced, that didn't mean that he had a breeze through with the paper. With everything from open-ended questions to trick ones that sent his brain into a whirl, Akatani got quite the mental workout during those 2 hours. He would say that he definitely will pass this part of the exam, but wondering how he did was thrown into the back burner when his stomach growled, and he was reminded that he still had the practical exam to take. And so, Akatani joined the flow of candidates staying on for their practical to the UA cafeteria for lunch break. A babble of noise greeted the purple-haired teen as he entered the cafeteria. Most of the tables were already taken, and the stalls had long queues snaking backwards by several feet. Akatani got into line and waited. As he inched forward, he silently listened in on the conversations overlapping one another in the queue and the surrounding room. He picked up snatches of discussions about the written paper, whether how easy or difficult it was, and on a different note, what they would have to face in the practical exam. He heard some think it's robots, others thought of holographic villains. One outlandish claim Akatani heard as he neared the stall was the UA staff were going to act as villains, and they will need to take them down in order to pass it. Whether it was robots or masquerading teachers, Akatani gave little thought to the speculation, ordering a katsudon upon his turn and walking away with tray, holding his lunch. Now came the task of finding a place to eat. Although many tables had at least one empty seat, being the ice king he had become, Akatani wanted a private spot for him to eat his lunch in peace. Snaking through the crowded cafeteria, he spotted an empty 2-seat table next to a window. He makes a beeline for it, quickly claims the table by setting his tray down onto it, and sitting down himself. As he dug into his katsudon, Akatani observed his surroundings. There were a couple of stragglers like him eating alone, but most were sitting in pairs, trios, or quartets, either quietly eating or rambunctiously chatting and laughing at the same time. Akatani never knew what it must have felt like to eat with friends, something he could thank Bakugu for. In his current cold emotional state, he saw interacting with others beyond what is necessary to get the job done as pointless. It was tiresome, sapping away at one's energy to find the right things to say and keep a conversation going, and to avoid stepping on an awkward landmine. Yeah, he'd rather be alone. But even still, deep down in his heart, where a tiny part of Midoriya Izuku still existed, he wondered what it would be like to have someone to chat with over lunch. "Hey, may I sit here?" He just had to go and jinx himself, didn't he? Akatani glanced at the person who had just approached his table. It was a teenage boy, slightly taller than him at full height. He had a head of short blonde hair with a tint of orange mixed in, with a black streak that resembled a bolt of lightning running across his left side fringe. He had matching colored eyes and small eyebrows. "I hope you don't mind. All of the other tables are full." The teen grinned a little nervously. Akatani moved his glance away from the blonde to the rest of the cafeteria. There were some tables that had one seat empty, but most were full. Now, Akatani might have turned into a frosty ice king, but he still had manners. He wasn't going to stoop down to Bakugu's level and tell the blonde to shove off. Sure, Akatani figured that as long as the blonde didn't try to initiate a conversation with him, things will be just peachy. So, you here for the heroics practical too? No such luck. Pausing mid-chew, Akatani glanced at the blonde teen across from him, waiting expectantly for an answer. Not much of a talker, aren't you? Akatani raised an eyebrow, feeling the first vestiges of irritation settle in his stomach. Anyway, I'm Kaminari Denki, by the way. The teen introduced himself. What's your name? Here, Akatani spoke. Why do you want to know? Surprised by the cold response, Kaminari went on the defensive. Hey man, no need to chew my head off. I was just curious. Akatani was unrepentant. Curiosity killed the cat. But satisfaction brought it back. Kaminari countered with a cheeky grin. Akatani felt his irritation growing. Why couldn't this Kaminari person just leave him alone? His patience wore thin with the blonde's next question. Whoa, those are some really cool scars there. How did you get them? Akatani's irritation exploded. Is it that difficult for you to let me eat my lunch in peace? He growled, startling Kaminari. Hey man, what gives? I just wanted to get to know you better. As it never occurred to you, Akatani snapped, that some people would prefer to go about their business without annoying pricks stick their noses into places where they don't fucking have any business with. Although Kaminari rightfully should have felt insulted at being called a prick, for some reason, he wasn't. In fact, it only fueled his desire to get to know this Ice King sitting across from him. But aren't you working to be a pro hero? You'll have to work with others to catch the baddies out there, you know? Akatani was unfazed. I have no qualms against working with others towards a goal, but I draw the line at getting too personal with someone. One will only get hurt when they least expect it. I will not be like those sorry fools. I won't let any backstabbers or superficial fakes hold me down. The sheer iciness in the purple-haired teen's last sentence left Kaminari. A moment passes. Akatani snaps the blonde from his stupor by getting up and taking his tray off from the table. He silently went to return his finished lunch before making a beeline for the doors. There was to be a briefing in the auditorium before the practical exam, and Akatani took it as the perfect excuse to disappear. Watching him leave the cafeteria, the cogs in Kaminari's brain began working as he turned back to his lunch and thought. He might not be the brightest kid on the block, but he was able to spot a person who desperately needed a friend in their lives. Whoever this purple-haired teen was, he was in serious need of a friend, despite the seemingly impenetrable layers of ice encasing his heart. As Kaminari continued his lunch, he didn't want to be late for the briefing. After all, a new goal etched itself into his resolve. Befriend the fuck out of that purple-haired Ice King. The briefing was, honestly, nothing much to go for it. The fact that it was being presented by the pro hero Yamada Hizashi, or Present Mike, made no difference for Akatani, who 10 months prior as Midoriya would have fanboyed at the fact that a pro hero was in the same room as him. Now, the purple-haired teen just listened impassively, as did virtually everyone else in the auditorium, as Present Mike explained the point system from the robots they were to face later on, and how attacking other candidates or other unheroic actions would result in immediate disqualification from the exam. Hearing this, Akatani almost smirked. If anything, he thought, Bakugu was the likeliest to commit such unheroic actions, given his attitude and personality. But realistically, even Akatani knew that the explosive blonde wouldn't use his quirk on the other candidates just to get the highest score. Unless said candidates were quirkless, that is. The briefing was wrapped up, and the candidates were dismissed to go change into the clothes they intended to wear for the practical. For Akatani, it was a tracksuit with a forest green top and royal purple pants. Then, they were transported to the different battle centers they had been assigned to for the exam. Arriving at his assigned battle center, Akatani could almost feel the tension and anticipation amongst the gathered candidates, which, to his momentary surprise, included Kaminari. Everyone here wanted to come out on top, to be accepted into the most prestigious hero academy in the country. Behind those towering gates stood that chance, and everyone wanted to be the one who got that chance. The gates opened with a rumble. The candidates readied themselves. Akatani vaguely heard Present Mike speaking in the background, but it came as inaudible jargon due to his focus on the task ahead. Though, he heard one word loud and clear. Start. Akatani activated his quirk, and with a loud electric crack, took off into flight through the gates. Leaving behind the other candidates reeling in the electrical aftershock, Akatani leaned upward, shooting towards the sky to calibrate his bearings. The arena was made up of several city blocks in a grid system, with towering skyscrapers and buildings of various sizes. Akatani looked around. I've got to find a cluster of robots together. I don't know how long I have until the others recover. Then, down below, along one of the smaller streets, he spots a group of 2 points robots, moving about aimlessly. Perfect. Akatani swooped down, channeling his electricity into a ball between his palms. As he got close enough, and the robots finally noticing his incoming form, he forced the ball apart into volatile energy in an attack he dubbed Initho, or electric field blast. This was one of his favorites. He released the energy field at the robots, the electrical currents overriding and frying their mechanical systems, causing internal explosion. He flew away, leaving the smoldering robots to fall, earning him 10 points. By now, he can hear noises and shouts from elsewhere in the arena. The other candidates have entered the arena. He needed to step up his game. Soaring up into the air again, Akatani spotted a pair of 3-pointer robots flying up towards him. Throwing his hands forward, he released a burst of high-powered, high-frequency bullets of electricity at the robots. The bullets pierced through the robots' metal bodies, tearing apart their insides. Both fell to the ground, crashing into a high-rise building and taking out the top floors with them. That was 16 points. Barely a moment later, Akatani heard something approaching him. A lone 2-pointer robot was coming at him, with a deadly-looking blade aimed straight at his head. Akatani forced his electricity into his own blade and charged at the robot. With a powerful swing, he sliced off the robot's blade, then cleaved it into 2 from the top down. Still sparking, the robot plummeted to the earth. Along the way, it crashed into a 3-pointer that a candidate with a glowing red aura was about to take out, bumping his score to 21. The red aura guy gave him a dirty look, at which he returned with a nonchalant shrug before shooting off. 7 more minutes. You're doing great, listeners. I need to pick things up, Akatani thought to himself. Shifting his electric blade into a whip, he shot off into another direction. Spotting a quartet of 3-point robots that immediately came after him with machine gun barrels, Akatani cracked his whip at them before they could fire at him. The robots were knocked away as if they weighed nothing. They were sent careening into a nearby building, crashing through the support columns. The building caved into itself, collapsing in a cloud of dust and rubble. 33 points. Flying off to a small plaza, Akatani spotted a mix of 1-point and 2-point robots, 20 in total, gathered within the enclosed space. Touching down to the ground and hiding behind a tree, Akatani considered his next move. Got it. Another one of his favorites. Dashing out from his hiding spot, Akatani crouched down. With his hands just hovering over the stonework floor of the plaza, he unleashed a wave of supercharged electric currents in a move he called Danshid Hongsi, or electric flood. The wave caught the robots off guard, electrocuting their systems and either combusting into flames or exploding into shrapnel. Akatani did some mental calculations. He should be at 64 points now. 4 minutes. Hurry, 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 listeners. No rest for me then, Akatani remarked to himself. Taking off into the air again, he pondered his next move. Looking down, he noticed a candidate with hair that appeared to be made of ribbons. She was so busy taking down a 3-pointer robot that she failed to notice a pair of robots, a 1-pointer and 2-pointer, creeping up towards her with gun barrels aimed at her. His morals kicked in. Swooping down behind the robots, Akatani created 2 long ropes of crackling electricity. He shot them at the robots, wrapping around them tightly. The ribbon-haired candidate turned around at the same time, just as Akatani yanked the ropes back, pulling the robots away from her. She watched in awe as he threw the robots up into the air and straight into one another, crushing both. 67 points, plus 5 rescue points, totaling 72 points. As the twisted and crumpled remains of both robots fell back down to the ground, both Akatani and the girl made eye contact. A moment passes. Akatani gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before shooting up into the air again with another loud crack, startling the girl out of her stupor. Akatani spotted a lone three-pointer a moment later. As he decapitated the robot, he wondered why hadn't there been any zero-pointer robots unleashed upon them yet. What was it with him and jinxing the situation today? The moment he touched back down on the ground to catch his breath, screams and shouts echoed all around as fellow candidates began running away from something. The thing was, what's got them so frightened in the first place? Akatani turned around. Oh fucking hell. A gargantuan robot, with a large zero painted on its body, was rumbling towards the fleeing candidates. It towered over the buildings, blocking out the sun and casting its immense shadow over the street Akatani was on. Windows shattered as its appendages smashed through them, and roofs were knocked clean off the tops of buildings, sending debris raining down onto the street and the candidates. Akatani stared at the advancing robot, in awe at its titanic size. Unlike his fellow candidates, he didn't fear the hulking metallic monster coming to crush them all. In fact, he felt disgust towards the others for fleeing. Cowards, all of them. Your last 2 minutes, listeners. That was Present Mick's voice, Akatani recognized. Then came another one. Help me. It was one he also recognized. Looking straight ahead, he noticed someone under some rubble that had been knocked down earlier. It was the source of the cry. And it was Kaminari. The blonde was struggling to pull himself out of the rubble, but both of his legs were trapped. He couldn't get away, and the robot was advancing forwards. Akatani's heart nearly stopped. Kaminari was going to get crushed. The first person who willingly approached him and actually had a proper conversation, albeit mostly one-sided, with him was going to die. A crackle of electricity struck his frozen heart. Akatani narrowed his eyes. Not on his watch. Kaminari, in all honesty, didn't expect the situation to turn out like this. He had tried every opportunity to approach the purple-haired Ice King from lunch, looking for him during the briefing and when they were getting changed, but to no avail. He appeared to strike the jackpot when he realized that the Ice King was assigned to the same battler center as he was. But just as he was about to approach him, the gates opened, Present Mike yelled start, and there was an explosion of electricity. With his quirk composed of electricity as well, Kaminari wasn't sent reeling like the other candidates. But he had been shocked, nonetheless, as he watched the Ice King fly into the arena with a burst of electricity. That settled it. He was going to catch up with this electric Ice King and get to know him. While the others were still recovering from the electric aftershock, Kaminari dashed into the arena in pursuit of the purple-haired teen. But before he could figure out where he had gone to, the robots made their presence known. Kaminari split his efforts between taking down as many robots as possible without frying his own brain, and looking for the purple-haired teen. Many times, he would witness the latter unleashing attacks against robots, with a quirk that was similar to his own, if one were to multiply the strength and power by at least tenfold, and gave it a jade-green color. But before he could get close enough to call him out, the Electric Ice King would fly off to another direction, leaving behind him and smoldering, destroyed robots. This happened frequently, and despite picking up a decent score for himself, Kaminari was frustrated. He just wanted to know the guy's name. Damn it. Finally, after taking down a two-pointer robot, he spotted the Ice King land a couple of paces in front. This was his chance. The first word was on his tongue. When suddenly, all hell broke loose. There was a loud rumbling noise, then followed by a loud crash. Kaminari turned around and nearly shit his pants. A gargantuan zero-pointer robot was advancing towards them. It was destroying everything in its path, sending broken glass and debris raining down from the heavens. Kaminari forgot about his plan to call out to the Ice King and book it like the others. But no sooner had he tried to move, he tripped over a piece of concrete, landing with a painful thud on the fake street. Less than a second later, something heavy fell onto his legs, exacerbating the pain he was already in. Kaminari tried to pick himself up, but found that he couldn't. Looking back, he reeled in horror realizing both his legs were crushed under a small pile of twisted metal and concrete. He was trapped, and the robot was still rumbling forward, towards him. A single thought flashed in his mind. He was going to die. But he didn't want to die. He was still too young, a teenager. He never got to see the world, never to start a family of his own, never got to become a pro hero. No, he needed to live. Kaminari strained against the concrete, but effort proved futile. As the robot got closer and more rubble came raining down, he realized he needed help, fast. He saw his chance when through the dust, he spotted the silhouette of a figure. Focusing his energy, he called out desperately, "Help me." Akatani had one more move in his arsenal, which he purposefully did not use except for in situations like this one. The reason being was that it took out a lot of energy from him, and despite bonding with his core, he was still surviving on electricity. If he used this move more than once consecutively, it would deplete his electricity to the point that his body wouldn't be able to support itself. He could die. But death from core depletion was far from Akatani's train of thought. He only thought of saving Kaminari. Akatani raised his hands, and through his will, starting absorbing any and all kinds of electrical energy from the surroundings. The sky above the arena actually appeared to distort, as static electricity was pulled from the clouds. The still sparking remnants of other robots had their remaining electric charge absorbed away, and any electrical systems that were in any of the still intact buildings were drained of their voltage. Akatani made sure not to drain any electricity from the other candidates, if they had any. He was a cold ice king, not a heartless villain who preyed on the souls of innocents. And besides, with this much electrical energy coming from the arena, he didn't need any human sources to pull this move off. A move he dubbed Lignosen, or God of Lightning, Final Burst. As electrical energy was pulled into his core, his form began to glow, as did his scars with a jade green color. He was ready, but first, he needed to get the robot's attention. Aiming one hand slightly away, Akatani fired a burst of electricity at the robot's hand, which had been coming down to crush Kaminari, who looked ready to pass out from fear. The electricity paralyzed the robot's hand and arm. Attention distracted, it turned towards the source of the electrical attack. Akatani and the robot made eye contact. The teen's eyes flashed. "Surprise, motherfucker." Akatani unleashed all of the built-up electrical energy in one go at the robot. There was a blinding flash of jade green. Those candidates who had stopped to glance back shielded their eyes in pain. Kaminari did the same. The light dimmed a little, revealing a giant beam of crackling electrical bolts shooting from Akatani's hands. The beam shot straight at the robot, piercing through its metal body like a hot knife to butter. The high voltage of the electrical currents short-circuited the robot's mechanical systems, combusting the wires and other components as if they were made of paper. With so many parts combusting, added with the sheer intensity of the electric beam, all contained with a limited area of space, the buildup of energy within the robot's body quickly became too great to be held back. There was a moment of silence, and then, boom. Those who were in the center that day remembered the moment as if a nuke had exploded overhead. The explosion tore apart the robot into shrapnel, sending pieces of wire and metal flying in all directions. Buildings and the street below became targets, as bits of tarmac, glass, concrete, and steel were kicked up from impacts with the shrapnel. The shockwave that immediately followed was even more devastating. It raced in all directions like a tsunami. Any surviving windows shattering and buildings, whole and damaged, had their supports blown away as if they were made of toothpicks. The resulting collapses rained even more projectiles of rubble down towards the candidates. Those who could still run did so, while others who could make shields covered themselves and others from the deadly downpour of destruction. For the second time that day, Kaminari thought he was going to die. He was the closest to the robot when it exploded, so he felt the brunt of the shockwave. He could see the collapsing buildings and the rubble falling everywhere. He tried to cover himself from any debris, but at the back of his mind, he knew it was futile. The rubble was still falling. Some were going to land on him. He was as good as dead. But suddenly, he was snatched away from death's cold clutches as footsteps raced towards him, and a familiar voice reached his ringing ears. "Kaminari." Keep your head down. The blonde felt the person crouch over him, protecting him from the falling debris. Glancing up, he noticed the figure lift their hand up. Crackles of jade-green electricity spiderwebbed from their fingers, creating a dome that covered them both. He recognized the figure. Then came the impact. Kaminari flinched as rubble came cascading onto the dome, crashing against it with loud thuds. He quickly realized, however, that the dome was holding up, protecting the both from the onslaught. But the other teen appeared to be straining themselves by this point. The dome appeared to flicker at several points. He had to help. Kaminari discreetly raised his hand and added his own electricity into the dome, creating a second layer that strengthened the protection against the falling rubble, which after several moments began to subside. Finally, after God knows how long, the rubble stopped falling. The dust clouds still hung around, but they weren't an immediate threat of things falling on their heads any longer. They survived. They were alive. Time's up. That's all, listeners. You've completed the exam. Akatani ached all over. Just as he expected, Leino-shun took out a great deal from him. He thanked his lucky stars when the rubble stopped falling. It had been exhausting holding up the protective dome for so long. He appreciated Kaminari for helping him. He wasn't sure if he could hold the dome any longer given his weakened state without his assistance. As the dust started to clear, Akatani straightened up, and with some careful maneuvering, he used some of his remaining electricity to push the concrete trapping Kaminari's legs off. "Can you walk?" he asked the blonde. Kaminari, who was still a bit dazed at what had happened, merely nodded his head. Akatani, now feeling even more exhausted than before, slowly helped the blonde to his feet. Supporting the slightly taller teen by putting his arm over his shoulders, the pair slowly walked away from the epicenter of the explosion as the dust finally subsided, revealing the extent of the damage. It was near total destruction for several blocks in every direction. Where there had been buildings before were now just piles of rubble, broken glass, and twisted metal. The other candidates were in slightly better shape, nursing bruises, cuts, or broken bones from the falling debris. Many were staring at the smoldering crater where the zero-pointer robot had once stood, while also staring at Akatani in dumbstruck shock. It was around the same time that Kaminari's brain started working again. He turned to Akatani, asking a question that was literally everyone's minds. "Are you a god?" Akatani turned to him. "No, I'm Akatani Mikomo." He was unable to say any more, as his body gave out from the exhaustion. Kaminari was just able to stop Akatani's limp form from smacking face-first into the ruined tarmac. "Medic! We need a medic here," the blonde shouted desperately. His calls were answered when an elderly voice pierced the silence. "Goodness me, what happened here? Is everyone okay?" A petite old woman with gray hair tied into a bun, dressed in a doctor's lab coat, and using an oversized syringe as a walking stick, ambled up to the candidates. She planted a kiss on those who had injuries, which healed almost immediately, and gave out gummies to everyone, regardless of their physical states. Kaminari, still holding up an unconscious Akatani, called out, "Recovery girl, please help." Said healing hero turned around. "My word, let's have a look-see." Approaching them, she examined Akatani's lifeless form. Kaminari waited anxiously for her diagnosis, the other candidates also peering over at the scene, watching with anticipation. After several moments, she straightened, a serious expression on her aged face. "It's Quirk overuse and exhaustion, but a serious case," she remarked. "Young man, do you know his name?" "Akatani," Kaminari replied. "I'll have to take young Akatani to the infirmary for further observation," Recovery Girl said, before tapping on the pink headset she wore. "Bring a stretcher to Battle Center B. We have a casualty." Within seconds, a pair of medical robots came rushing in with the requested stretcher. Kaminari helped to lift Akatani onto the stretcher before he was briefly checked over by Recovery Girl. She was about to depart with Akatani in tow, but Kaminari stopped her. "Recovery Girl, wait. Can I come too? Akatani saved me earlier. I need to make sure he'll be okay." The old woman pondered this. "Very well, you can come, so long as you don't get in the way. Am I clear?" Kaminari quickly nodded, and hurried after his savior and recovery girl out of the arena, leaving behind the other stunned candidates to slowly talk and wonder about the one who would be dubbed by them as the god of Jade Lightning. Chapter 5. Reactions and Results. The candidates of Battle Center B weren't the only ones raving about the god of Jade Lightning, who leveled a whole section of the arena just to rescue someone trapped under some rubble. Some distance away, in a conference room deep inside the campus, the staff of UA were in serious discussion over what they had just witnessed. And to say that they had been floored was the understatement of the century. What had started out as impressed remarks at Akatani's electric start and takedown of the robots turned into gobsmacked low-hanging jaws as the staff watched the teens single-handedly obliterate the zero-pointer robot and level a significant portion of the arena to nothing but rubble and come away from it with just a serious case of Quirk overuse. The stupor continued long after the exam concluded and the staff had gathered in the conference room to discuss the candidates' performances and how many points each were to be given. Nobody said anything as Akatani's exam footage was replayed on a holographic screen, much too stunned to even utter a word as they watched the purple-haired teen take down robots as if they were nothing, and concluding with his destructive finale in rescuing Kaminari Denki. For several moments after the video ending, silence ensued, only broken by the odd words of the 18-plus only hero, Midnight, and modern hero art history teacher, Kiyama Namuri, who echoed the thoughts of those who witnessed the event firsthand at Battle Center B. Is the kid a god? Even if no one said anything in direct response, that was the general consensus of the gathered staff. The only ones who didn't seem blown away by Akatani's performance was the school principal, a humanoid hybrid animal, what kind is still a mystery to this day, by the name Nizu, who sported a thoughtful expression, and homeroom teacher of Class 1A, the underground pro hero Eraserhead, Aizawa Shoyuta, who seemed nonchalant with what he saw. Akatani-kun's Quirk is certainly unprecedented in its versatility and power, modern literature teacher Ishiyama Ken, also known as Samintas, remarked, and judging from how coordinated and steady he unleashes his attacks are, I'd say he's very much in tune with his Quirk. No kidding. Present Mike excitedly cut in. But that explosion at the end, though, I could hear and see it from the observation tower. If he really planned to pull it off, he might be really a god. Yet Akatani-kun collapsed at the end. 1B homeroom teacher Vlad King, or Kansekijiru, commented, the final attack must have consumed a lot of his power, which shows that it is not limitless. Still, Snipe added, y'all gotta admit the kid's hella godlike. That explosion should have killed him, but all he got away with was a serious case of Quirk overuse. But there is an issue there, Ectoplasm noted. While rescuing another candidate is certainly displaying heroic qualities, causing such extensive collateral damage will be devastating in a real-life setting. I think it's even a miracle no one else was severely injured or killed in that explosion. For the first time, Principal Nizu spoke. While that is true, I think with the right guidance and training, young Akatani would be able to control the power of his Quirk much more efficiently. Then he addressed the room as a whole. Why don't we all take a 5-minute break to stretch our legs before we tally his score? Murmurs of agreement came from all sides, followed by chairs moving. Nizu waited for his staff to leave the conference room to do whatever they wished for the next 5 minutes, before turning to the other person who didn't get up with the others. This person was a bony figure, clad in a yellow suit that seemed almost too big and baggy for his skeletal form, and rather scraggy blonde hair and shadowed eyes. What do you think, Toshinori? Toshinori had a thoughtful look. He certainly has potential, but he already has a powerful Quirk. I fear that if he were to take on One for All, his body will be unable to maintain the power of both Quirks. Nizu drummed his paws together. Do you have any alternatives? There's young Mirio, Toshinori replied. At the moment, he is the likeliest candidate. A few moments of silence follow, save for Nizu taking a sip of tea. Putting down the cup, he continued. Toshinori, I am concerned for you, he said. The reason I hired you was to protect you from the media getting wind of your limited time as All Might. Things will only get complicated if you don't decide on your successor soon. The man in question sighed. I know, Nizu, I know. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the UA campus, Kaminari was in the infirmary, keeping vigil over a still unconscious Akatani, now lying on a bed being monitored by Recovery Girl. In all honesty, Kaminari felt a bit surreal gazing upon the lifeless, almost vulnerable form of his savior, when not just an hour prior, said savior had decimated a massive robot and a good portion of a fake city just to save him from an early death. Furthermore, that, and the peaceful look on the teen's face stood in stark contrast to the cold, angry Ice King that sat across from him in the cafeteria. Akatani could have just joined the others' candidates in running away, leaving him to get crushed by the zero-pointer. But he didn't, and it both intrigued and confused the electric quirk user. Kaminari wondered what was going through Akatani's mind at the cafeteria and during the practical. The purple-haired teen was an enigma, a contradiction to his own actions. He was curious about the latter's background and history. Obviously, something must have happened to shape Akatani into the Ice King he was now. But Kaminari had no clue. And that became another reason for him to befriend the purple-haired Ice King. Kaminari wanted to understand Akatani's thought processes while thawing the latter's frozen heart with friendship. Kaminari momentarily moved his eyes away from his unconscious savior towards Recovery Girl. She had previously been on the phone with someone whom he believed to be Akatani's mother, and was now leafing through a clipboard while occasionally glancing at the purple-haired teen. That was the status quo for an amount of time for which Kaminari didn't bother to check. Only broken when the infirmary door opened, and in stepped a petite woman with forest green hair tied in a ponytail. "Please pardon my intrusion." Recovery Girl looked up from her papers. "Ah, are you Akatani-san?" "Yes, I am," Inko replied, closing the door behind her. "You must be Recovery Girl." Indeed, the healing pro-hero got to her feet, bowing respectfully. "How's my son?" Inko asked after returning the bow. "He's stable," Recovery Girl replied. "He hasn't woken up yet. A serious case of quirk overuse if I say so myself." "Well, Mikumo's the kind to overwork himself if not supervised." Inko sighed with a small smile. "May I see him?" "He's over here." Recovery Girl gestured to the bed where the teen laid. Inko nodded in thanks and walked over towards her son. She immediately noticed Kaminari, who had gotten up. "Oh, and who might you be?" The blonde teen quickly responded with a bow. "I'm Kaminari Denki, Akatani-san. I was in the same battle center as your son." "How did you two get acquainted?" asked Inko. "We shared a table at lunch," Kaminari replied. "And he saved me during the practical exam." Inko's eyebrows rose. "Saved you? Tell me what happened." Kaminari was in the midst of giving Inko a rather detailed breakdown of what transpired during the practical when Akatani's eyelids flickered. His following grimace got everyone's attention as he tried to sit up and fell back onto the mattress in pain. "God, someone kill me, please." "Big mood, man," Kaminari remarked. "Then again, you look like death warmed over." Akatani deadpanned at the cheeky blonde, ready to counter with a biting remark when he felt his mother's presence beside him. "How are you feeling, dear?" "Like a truck ran over me," Akatani groaned. "How did I get here?" "You passed out at the battle center." Recovery Girl came forth. "Your friend supported you until a stretcher could be brought over." Akatani blinked at the word friend before glancing over to Kaminari, who grinned and waved back. "How long has it been?" the purple-haired teen asked, glancing back to Recovery Girl. "Just more than an hour," she replied. "For such a serious case of quirk overuse, you regained consciousness fairly quickly. From what I was told, you used a lot of energy saving your friend. I expected you to be out for several more hours at least, given the nature of your quirk." "I expected that," Akatani commented. "That's why I toned down the power output for that move. Any more than that, and I would have depleted my electrical core completely." Recovery Girl nodded without further comment, while the opposite could be said for Kaminari, who appeared to have come to a horrifying realization. "Well, given that you're awake now and functioning normally," she continued, "I should be able to discharge after I cover a few things with your mother first." She turned to Inko. "Akatani-san, if you don't mind?" "Not at all," the forest green-haired woman dismissed quickly, pulling away from her son's bedside to follow the healing quirk heroine to her desk. Left to their own devices, Kaminari turned to Akatani. Dude, what happens when your electrical supply runs out? Runs out. Akatani raised an eyebrow as if it was obvious. If my core depletes, I'll die. Having his earlier guess confirmed only short-circuited Kaminari's comprehension, made worse by the purple-haired teen's nonchalant tone. His jaw fell open. Akatani grimaces. Kaminari, please close your mouth. Showing me the beginning of your esophagus isn't the most pleasant sight. Either the blonde ignored him, or most likely, was too shocked from the bombshell dropped into his brain to comply. Akatani sighed. With a low groan of pain, he reached forward and manually closed Kaminari's jaw. He laid back down against the pillow with a slightly exasperated look. Why are you looking like as if I told you memes were all a lie? While he was slightly miffed at the insinuation of what keeps him going was nothing but lies, Kaminari was still too shell-shocked to do anything other than reply directly to Akatani's question. That's fucking insane, man, he breathed. Are you, like, running on electricity or something? Akatani shrugged. I suppose I am. This did nothing to erase Kaminari's floored look. What the heck happened to you? Did you get struck by lightning and somehow gained your quirk that way? At this point, Akatani saw no other way around this conversation other than to spill the beans. Technically, I was struck by lightning, died, struck again, revived, and then gained my quirk. Silence followed. Kaminari stood frozen, jaw falling open again to accompany his wide eyes. Then, the silence was broken by a crackle of electricity flashing over the blonde's head, followed by another, and then another. Akatani watched, with merely a raised eyebrow, as Kaminari appeared to literally short-circuit before his eyes and crumple to the floor, still crackling with electricity. Glancing down at his downed peer, Akatani called out in monotone, "Recovery girl, we've got a casualty here." After reviving Kaminari and giving Akatani one last check over, the healing quirk heroine deemed them fit enough to be discharged. Leaving the infirmary behind, Kaminari stopped Akatani before they went on their separate ways. You got a phone? Akatani became slightly wary. Yes, why? We should swap numbers, obviously. Kaminari replied. Why? Hey, it's not every day that two people survive an exploding robot as a city crumbles to rubble around them while protecting each other. If that doesn't move us to phone number buddies, I don't know what would. Kaminari explained enthusiastically. Akatani's wariness did not abate. He was suspicious of people trying to get in too close to his personal bubble, thanks to a variety of reasons already mentioned. But, at the same time, he did save Kaminari when he could have run away from the zero-pointer robot, and Kaminari did stay by his side in the infirmary when he could have gone home. In a way, the electric blonde was right. The robot forged the first vestiges of some kind of bond between the both of them. Perhaps, putting up with Kaminari's presence may not be so bad. Okay. Kaminari's resulting smile appeared to light up the hallway. Akatani fished out his phone, unlocked it, and passed it to the blonde. Several electronic pings later, both numbers were shared and safely stored in each other's phone. Well, I gotta get going. Your mom must be waiting for you too. We should catch up sometime, yeah? This time, there was no hesitation on Akatani's part. He'd already swapped numbers, so no going back now, sure. Kaminari beamed, and with one final wave, dashed off down the hallway for the gates. Akatani, now alone, released a sigh, before making his way down the hallway himself, catching up with his mother for the journey home. A week passes while the scores are tallied up and the final decisions of who is to be accepted and the rest rejected are made. In the meantime, Akatani continued his routine of building up his quirk, exercising, and hero analysis. Despite not yet been accepted into UA, he also delved into the first-year curriculum to get a head start once school started. In between all this, Akatani maintained daily contact with Kaminari through text messages and calls. To his surprise, he found that he rather enjoyed chatting with the electric blonde. It didn't matter the topic, be it him attempting to calm down a rather frantic Kaminari about whether they will get accepted or not, or aimless texting at 2 a.m. in the morning due to an unusual bout of insomnia. There was something about hearing the perky blonde's voice or reading the emoji-riddled text messages he sent regularly that made the ice-cold Akatani feel a gentle wave of warmth. It was so unfamiliar, yet not unpleasant at the same time. Akatani thought to himself, was this what it was like to have a friend? Could he consider Kaminari a friend? Maybe. The concept of friendship was a thorny one for Akatani, given his history. Yet Kaminari was an outlier, someone he didn't expect. He had wormed his way into his heart and stayed there, refusing to be expelled by icy cold. The upbeat voice, the bright disposition and happy-go-lucky aura spread a warmth that thawed a thin layer of ice around his heart, and he welcomed it. So yes, Akatani could consider Kaminari his friend. And it was this burgeoning relationship that saw the electric blonde at the doorstep of the Ice King's apartment, jittering nervously and knocking feverishly on the door, hand-holding the envelope containing the results of the entrance exam. They received their results on the same day, and with prior agreement, had arranged to meet up at Akatani's place to unveil their fate together. Akatani appeared as stoic as ever when he answered the door, but his stomach trembled in solidarity with the shaking Kaminari. With quick greetings, the two friends retreated into the Ice King's room, while Inko, who was also suffering from nervous jitters of her own, went to attempt at making tea for their guest and themselves. Sitting on the bed, both teens opened their envelopes. They pulled out identical disc-shaped objects, which opened immediately into miniature projectors. A holographic screen appeared over both discs. Kaminari's eyes widened. No way. It's All Might. Akatani stayed noticeably stoic. Greetings, young Akatani/Kaminari. Let me know when the results actually come up, the purple-haired teen said, leaning back and gazing up at the ceiling, eyes going blank. Dude, it's All Might. Aren't you excited it's him? Kaminari exclaimed in disbelief. I don't give a flying fuck that it's All Might, Akatani aloofly spoke. Besides, he's just reading off a prepared script. There is nothing personal about this other than our results. I'm zoning out now. And he did. Akatani blocked out the number one hero's voice, while a confused Kaminari stared at him with cocked eyebrows. In the end, he didn't have to gaze blankly at the ceiling for that long. Shaken out of his dazing by his electric friend some 20 seconds later, Akatani turned to the projector, which now displayed a table listing 10 names and 2 corresponding numbers alongside each name. He zeroed in on one particular name, his own, at the number 1 spot, with 67 villain points and 55 rescue points, totaling 122 points. Akatani stared blankly at his results, barely registering being tackled by Kaminari in an excited hug. Dude, this is amazing. You're the top of the list. Being shaken side to side by the proud blonde, Akatani glanced down at another familiar name in the number 2 spot beneath his. Bakugo Katsuki, with 77 villain points, but 0 rescue points. A staggering difference of 45 points separated their names. Still being shaken by Kaminari, a tiny smile crept over Akatani's lips. I'm happy. You should be. You're so fucking cool. The table disappeared, and All Might filled the screen again. Kaminari pulled away to hear the rest of the hero's message. There was a slight deviation where All Might commented about Kaminari not getting into the top 10 and congratulated Akatani for getting number 1, but the two messages quickly returned into synchronized wording, which left Akatani's tiny grin to grow just a bit wider. Young Akatani/Kaminari, you passed the entrance exam. So now it begins. Holographic All Might stretched out a hand towards both teens. Come, this is your hero, Academia. Akatani found himself tackled again in an overjoyed hug. We did it, Akatani. We're both getting into UA's heroics course. Amidst Kaminari's whoops and cheers, the purple-haired teen muttered, yes, we are. And everyone better fucking watch out, because we're turning this shit show upside down, when unspoken, but nonetheless set in a glimmer in his jade-colored eyes. Chapter 6. The First Day. The first day of the school term dawned upon Akatani through the smooth passage of time, as he was rudely awakened from his slumber by his alarm clock blaring its unholy racket in the otherwise silent bedroom. Grabbing the infernal object and throwing it across the room, which destroyed the damn thing, thank heavens, Akatani groaned. He slowly sat up, blinking wearily for a moment to get his sleep-addled brain working for the new day. Letting out a loud yawn, Akatani climbed out of bed and shuffled sluggishly over to the bathroom. Behind the closed door, several noises could be heard. The toilet flushing and the tap running. Then there was silence, then a zap, followed by a sharp yelp. It opened, and out stepped Akatani, idly nursing his wrist where a small welt had begun to form. Now completely awake, he went to help his mother make breakfast. After breakfast, Akatani returned to the bathroom to brush his teeth. He then retreated back into his bedroom to get ready for school. He had hung up his new uniform, a set consisting of a gray blazer with forest green stripes on the sleeves and lapels and matching shoulder straps, white dress shirt, red tie, and forest green pants, the previous night in preparation for today. Gazing upon it for a brief second, Akatani took the set down from the rack. Changing out of his pajamas and tossing them into a nearby wash basket, he put his uniform on piece by piece, finishing off with his tie, which after countless practice, he managed to do it right. Grabbing his yellow backpack, Akatani exited his room, heading for the front door, where his mother awaited. "You've got this, Mikomo," said Inko, taking her son's hands into hers. "Always know that I'm proud of you, of what you have accomplished now, and what you will achieve in the future." "Thanks, Mom," Akatani replied. "Well then, I'm going." Sharing one last hug, mother and son bade each other farewell. Inko watched with a warmed heart as her son departed from home towards his destiny. The train ride to UA Station was an uneventful one. A faceless soul amidst the bustling morning rush hour crowds. Akatani was a single twig pushed along by the sea of people in and out of the train. Tapping out into the station concourse, he stopped, the flow continuing on around him. He glanced about for a moment. Akatani. Ah, there he was. From the crowds came forth a grinning electric Quirk blonde, dressed in a matching UA uniform. "Kaminari, Ohio." "Ohio. Ready to go?" "Yeah." The two friends left the station, engaged in a rather one-sided conversation, where Kaminari did most of the talking and Akatani nodding or giving short replies in return. Within minutes, the towering buildings of UA High School had come into view, and so too were other students from the school. For Akatani, it was one thing to come here as a candidate for an entrance exam, but another thing altogether to come as a student of the school. Despite his otherwise cold demeanor, he felt a sense of anticipation as he stepped through the front gates. His road to becoming a hero began here, and he swore to himself, he will become the hero that saves those who are unable of saving themselves. The poor, the weak, the quirkless, to give them hope and a reason to smile for one more day. "What do you think our teacher's going to be like?" Kaminari wondered. "No clue, but I heard the staff are pro-heroes," Akatani replied. "Really? That's so cool. Man, I can't wait to find out who our teacher is going to be." Akatani remained silent on that, but inwardly, he felt endeared towards Kaminari's excitement. In some way, it reminded him of the time when he was Midoriya Izuku, when anything related to pro-heroes would spark excitement within him. Of course, that was the past. He had no concern for what had already gone by. Though, if he and Kaminari were unlucky enough to be in the same class as Bakugo, which was extremely likely, since he was second place in the entrance exam rankings, they would have to put up with a constant reminder of his dark past. And judging from the loud shouts coming from within the classroom that was their assigned class, 1A, Bakugo was indeed a part of their class and already antagonizing their classmates. "What's up with the racket?" Kaminari remarked. Again, Akatani remained noticeably silent as he slid the door open. His gaze immediately zeroed in on two figures creating the argument. His heart inwardly sank. Sitting at a desk adjacent to the window with his feet propped up was Bakugo. His opponent in this verbal spar was a tall, muscular lad with an undercut and spectacles, who appeared to be liberal with the use of arm movements and gestures in a manner that reminded Akatani of a robot. In all frankness, the purple-haired teen couldn't care any less for what they were arguing about, which seemed to be on the line of Bakugo disrespecting their seniors who had used the desk before them by putting his feet up on it. But that didn't mean it wasn't starting to get on his nerves. Akatani scanned the room. Most of the desks had already been claimed or occupied. There were only 3 empty ones left, one behind a student with short blonde hair and a tail with a tuft of matching hair at the end, and 2 directly behind Bakugo. Well, it seems that beggars can't be choosers, it seemed. Kaminari, are you okay with those 2 seats behind that loud fuckmouth? Of course, the electric blonde quipped. I ain't gonna be separated from you for the rest of year. And besides, you can be my sound barrier. Akatani almost smiled at that. The 2 friends crossed the classroom and bagged the 2 adjacent desks. Kaminari picked up his bag and started ruffling through it, while Akatani relaxed into his seat, clasped his hands on the desk, and patiently waited for their teacher to arrive and homeroom to begin. Now, if only those 2 arguing fucktards could just shut the fuck up and not give him a blinding headache before the day had even begun. Akatani felt his annoyance steadily climb the longer the bickering duo in front of him continued their nonsense, which showed no sign of abating. His clasped hands grew tighter, his eyelid twitching. Several tick marks appeared over his head as his patience finally wore thin and snapped. Removing one hand from the other, Akatani clenched it into a fist, raised it, and slammed it back down on his desk with all of his pent-up irritation. The echoing BAM silenced all activity in the room. Students who had been idly chatting or otherwise minding their own business turned towards Akatani, including Bakugo and the bespectacled robot-like student. Kaminari merely peeked over to see what was happening. Has it not occurred to the both of you dumbfucks? Akatani growled venomously at the previously bickering duo, that some of us want a peaceful start to the first day of school and not have to listen to your incessant yapping. The bespectacled student looked scandalized at being told off, while Bakugo narrowed his eyes dangerously. And who do you think you are? You fucking son of a bitch? Me? I'm Akatani Mikomo, the purple-haired teen replied, leaning back and folding his arms. And who are you by any chance? A tick mark appeared over the explosive blonde's head. I'm Bakugo Katsuki, and you listen here. You fucking extra, if you know what's good for you, stay out of my fucking way. You may have gotten first in the entrance exam, but remember this, you're nothing but a pebble in my way of becoming the #1 hero. Really? Akatani raised an unimpressed eyebrow. That's rich, coming from someone who just oozes with superiority complex and got his ass handed to him by a pebble prior to the entrance exam and got 0 rescue points. Bakugo's eyes widened marginally at the embarrassing memory. A literal growl escaped his clenched jaws, small explosions bursting from his palms. What the fuck did you just say? I was there. Right place, right time, Akatani shrugged. And you? The #1 hero? Don't make me laugh. What kind of hero explodes at someone who just wants to help you up? That got the watching onlookers whispering, while the person in question, who was sitting at the opposite side of the room, blushed slightly at being indirectly mentioned. Listen, Bakaho, Akatani continued, leaving no room for interruption. I may not know you very well, but just witnessing those small moments already speaks wonders about your atrocious attitude and disgusting personality. How you intend to become a hero, I don't know. But people are not going to take nicely to a hero who is arrogant and antagonizes those who just want to help. In fact, Akatani paused in mock thinking, a look of pure condescension blooming over his face as he returned to Bakugo, who looked ready to explode. I think someone like you is more suited to become the #1 villain. After all, you appear to be a petty, tantrum-throwing, hate-filled son of a whore who acts high and mighty to cover his own cowardice and weakness. Absolute silence followed his cold vitriol. Even Bakugo appeared stupefied at the level of icy malice the attack against his character carried. The silence lasted for a beat or two, broken by Kaminari's sudden commentary. Sheesh man, like I know roasted chicken is nice and all, but if you roast it too much, you'll get only burned charcoal left. It was terrible. It was unwarranted. It was nonsense. And it was what burnt through the final bit of fuse on what was Bakugo's explosive ire. The explosions in his palms grew exponentially as he shot up from his seat, knocking his chair backwards. I will fucking kill you, you motherfucking son of a dash. Bakugo lunged for Akatani, who merely sat still with his unimpressive, condescending stare. He didn't need to worry. having spotted someone enter the room during the middle of his verbal takedown, whose scarf, or is it bandages, had risen up from their shoulders and swooped towards Bakugu at remarkable speed. The raging blonde suddenly found himself restrained by the scarf, bandages, the explosions cutting off in the same instant. First day of the year, and I already have to deal with problem children, the person muttered. I'm not paid enough for this job. The scarf retracted, unceremoniously dropping Bakuga mid-leap. Akatani turned his gaze towards the owner of the scarf, just in time to see their long black hair fall to their shoulders and their eyes to lose their red glow. The person had a rather unkempt appearance and looked like they needed vast amounts of sleep. On the bright side, I've now got everyone's attention at least. The person, a man, Akatani observed, sighed, ruffling through a pocket for something. He fished out a small bottle of what appeared to be eye drops, applied a bit to both eyes, blinked, before putting the bottle away. He addressed the class. I'm your homeroom teacher, Izawa Shoyuta. Pleasure to meet you all. Sheesh, he doesn't sound pleased to be here at all, that's for sure, Kaminari inwardly remarked. What crawled up his arse and died? Akatani wondered at the same time. Izawa bent downwards behind the teacher's table, coming back up with 20 sets of some kind of clothes that were of a predominantly navy blue color. Come up here and take your assigned PE uniform. Get changed and meet me at the training grounds in 15 minutes. Get moving. With that note of positivity, Izawa walked out of the classroom without a further word. The students made no move for several beats before slowly getting up to retrieve their assigned uniform, their names taped to the plastic covers. Akatani found his and tossed Kaminari's over to him. As they departed the classroom, Kaminari turned to Akatani. Our teacher's kinda weird. I'm still wondering what crawled up his arse and died, Akatani replied. Probably bedbugs, but rather unlikely. I don't think he understands the concept of sleep or beds. Kaminari couldn't stop the resulting snicker. 15 minutes later, the class, all dressed in their PE uniforms, had gathered at the training grounds. Izawa did a quick check to ensure all were accounted for before addressing them. All right, he drawled. This morning we are conducting a quirk apprehension test to gauge your capabilities. Several students glanced at one another, while Akatani stared straight ahead. A single hand rose up. Izawa-sensei, the girl who Bakugu exploded at before the entrance exam asked. I thought we were supposed to attend the welcoming ceremony and the guidance counselor meeting. Said teacher stared pointedly back at her. In the field of heroics, you don't have time for superfluous platitudes. The girl shrunk back slightly, lowering her hand. Izawa continued on. We'll be covering several stations this morning. First the softball throw, then long jump, 50-meter sprint, endurance running, grip strength, side jumps, pull-ups, and seated toe touch. Izawa checked the class registrar. Bakugu Katsuki, you're up first. Said explosive blonde trudged off from the class. Izawa handed him a softball. Use your quirk, don't hold back. Bakuga grunted and got into position inside the circle drawn into the pitch. He steadied himself, pulling his arm back like the wind-up to a spring-loaded toy. Akatani watched with an uninterested, deadpan gaze as Bakugu screamed aloud, die, as he pitched the ball with his quirk at full strength. The resulting explosion rocked the grounds, a shockwave spreading in all directions, kicking up dust and gravel as the softball went hurtling towards the sky, disappearing with a twinkle. Izawa, seemingly unaffected by the explosion, stared down at a tablet in his hands. 705.2 meters, he read. The class went into uproar. That's so cool. Unbelievable. His quirk is so manly. Save for two. While Kaminari acknowledged the impressive distance, he wasn't blown away as his other classmates. Akatani, on the other hand, showed no reaction whatsoever. He did, however, react when one of their classmates, a girl with pink hair and skin, exclaimed, "This is going to be so much fun." So much fun. Akatani shifted over to Izawa, who had gone eerily quiet and menacing. The excited aura that hung over the students died instantly. Is that what you think you're going to be doing for the next 3 years? Having fun? Izawa asked unnervingly, his manic grin and bloodshot eyes not helping his image. Are you lot not planning on becoming heroes? An unsettling feeling wafted through the nervous students. Kaminari, on the other hand, merely looked curious, if a little apprehensive, while Akatani remained blank. Perhaps this will make you lot take things more seriously, Izawa continued. I'm implementing a new rule. The one who comes in last place will be expelled. Cue indignant uproar from the students. Kaminari broke into a nervous sweat, fidgeting slightly until he felt a hand reach around him and gently grip his shoulder. Don't worry, Akatani muttered under the din. In the unlikely chance you get expelled, I'll be pulling out and leaving with you. I heard the other hero schools have decent programs. Kaminari felt his friend's hand squeeze his shoulder, and he relaxed. The same could not be said for their fellow classmates. How can you do that? Preposterous. That is unreasonable and unfair. Izawa remained unfazed, folding his arms across his chest. Unfair? The world out there is an unfair place, and it is hero's duty to correct that unfairness. His eyes narrowed. If you came here expecting to socialize with friends and goofing off, well, I have a news flash for you. The next 3 years of your education here will push you to your breaking point. UA's motto is plus ultra. You will need your all and beyond to overcome what's in store for you. The class went dead silence following this proclamation. Izawa took this as a sign to continue on with the test. Akatani Mikomo, you're up next. The purple-haired teen nodded. Kaminari nudged his shoulder with a quiet, you've got this. He stepped towards Izawa, impervious to the whispers that cropped up when his name was called. Who is he? Wasn't he the guy who obliterated the zero-pointer robot in the battle center during the entrance exam? It is. I was in the same battle center as he was. Really? No way. That's him. Izawa passed Akatani a softball, but unlike with Bakugu, he didn't say anything. Akatani stepped into the circle. He released a breath and stared ahead. He raised the hand holding the softball. He intended to channel a smaller portion of the energy he used to decimate the zero-pointer robot to blast the softball the furthest he can get. But something wasn't right. Akatani knew everyone was staring at him, awaiting how far he was going to throw the ball. But one person in particular stood out. He knew right away that it was Izawa. Even with his back turned to him, Akatani felt his teacher's gaze the strongest. He paused. He knew something would happen if he tried to channel his power and blast the ball, and it would be courtesy of Izawa. Now what was it that connected him to this? Oh, that's right. He remembered now. Akatani frowned. This would not do. At all. It happened so fast, catching everyone off guard. There was a bright flash and a loud crack. Everyone, save for Kaminari, jolted as a wave of electricity burst from Akatani and spread in all directions. Those who had been in Battle Center B were reminded of the paralyzing shock they were subjected to at the beginning of the entrance exam. Even Izawa, who had been gazing at Akatani, was momentarily thrown off kilter when the electric wave phased through him, breaking eye contact with the teen. The wave dissipated as quickly as it came. Everyone reeled and jerked out of control for several moments. As they recovered, Akatani slowly lowered his raised arm, still staring off into the distance. Izawa-sensei. Attention was divided between Akatani and their teacher. Or underground hero, Eraserhead. Quirk, erasure of others' quirks on direct eye contact. The suspense rose steadily. Kaminari knew what was coming and braced himself. Could you mind your fucking business and let me do this properly? A beat of silence. Then chaos. Scandalized gasps echoed. Horrified whispers broke out. The robotic student started swishing his arms wildly, screeching about the unpardonable offense of cursing out a teacher and for the immediate recantation of those words. Kaminari, on the other hand, sighed with an exasperated grin. Izawa, though he appeared as calm as previously, but if one were to look closely, his eyelid was twitching. Akatani continued relentlessly. I knew you were going to erase my quirk because you thought that I had no control over it. No doubt you thought that when you watched me blow up the zero-pointer robot to rescue my friend. Well, I also have a news flash for you too. He turned back towards the teacher. The other students, save for Kaminari, flinched. Akatani's eyes were glowing. This power is mine to wield. I know the ins and outs of it, while you don't. I know how to control it, you don't. You might be our teacher, but you have no fucking say over how I choose to utilize it. Also, Akatani took a breath. I would kindly advise you to never attempt your quirk on me again. My quirk is my lifeblood. It is the reason my heart is still beating. It is the reason why the blood still flows through my veins. It is the reason why I can still function as a human being. So, Aizawa-sensei. The teen's eyes flashed dangerously. Unless you wish to have a dead body on your hands, I would suggest that you leave me the fuck alone and let me do my thing. The entire class held their breaths. A few admired Akatani for having the balls to cuss out a teacher like that. Some were horrified at the possibility of having such a powerful, yet vulnerable quirk. Some expected an all-out battle to take place between their teacher and Akatani. Others, like the robot-like student, expected Aizawa to expel Akatani on the spot. They were all surprised and rightfully confused when Aizawa merely nodded in acknowledgement. "Carry on," he said, stepping backwards. Akatani turned away, facing towards the distance again. He raised his hand, holding the softball towards the sky. He concentrated, channeling his energy towards his palm. The visible Lichtenberg scars running up his arm began to glow, as crackles of jade-green electricity ran wildly up and down the appendage. The growing energy engulfed the softball, and it vibrated rapidly in his grip, as if wanting to escape. Akatani let his power rise a little more, and at the right intensity, he released. With an even louder crack, the softball shot out from the teen's palm like a bullet leaving the barrel of a gun. Some jumped at the sound, others watched with jaw-dropping awe as they watched the ball fly towards the heavens in a beam of electrical energy. Like Bakugu's ball, it too went so far that it eventually disappeared from sight, but the real surprise came when Aizawa announced Akatani's score. He didn't say any numbers, just one word: orbit. Another beat of silence. "Wait, so you're saying?" A student with spiked-up ruby-red hair chimed in. "Akatani shot the ball so far out that it's now orbiting the Earth." Aizawa simply said, "Yes." Another beat of silence. Then, chaos. "Holy fuck. He really did that. That's so badass." Akatani paid the admiration no mind whatsoever. He did, however, pay attention to Bakugu's reaction, and he was not disappointed. The explosive blonde was in a state of total disbelief, torn between denial and shock. He was trembling all over, no doubt from his volatile rage rising to the surface. Akatani could only guess how much his record had damaged his former bully's ego and pride, and he knew he had dealt a really heavy blow. Well, time to add the cherry on the top, then. Akatani made sure he made eye contact with Bakugu, and as naturally as he could with his Ice King persona, he huffed condescendingly at him, before stepping out of the circle back to stand with his classmates. The resulting explosion was dramatic, but not unexpected. "You think you're better than me, you piece of shit? I'll fucking murder you." Once again, Akatani had nothing to worry about the incoming fireball that was Bakugu, having spotted Aizawa activating his capture weapon, his scarf, or bandages, long before anyone else did. Bakugu found himself once again ensnared by the weapon, his quirk erased. "You are really starting to get on my nerves, Bakugu," Aizawa warned. "This is the second time I had to use my quirk on you, which I can guarantee is not fun for me." He released his capture weapon, unceremoniously dropping Bakugu onto the pitch. "If I have used it one more time on you, you will be out of UA before you can say hero course. Am I clear?" Picking himself up from the ground, Bakugu grunted in response. He glared at Akatani, who returned it with a dismissive gaze. Aizawa took out his eye drops and reapplied them to his dry eyes. Putting the bottle away, he called out the next name. "Urarako Ochako, you're next." In the end, Akatani's record was broken by Uraraka, who had a gravity quirk. She launched the ball so far into the galaxy that her score was an unbeatable infinity. Nonetheless, he was satisfied that he beat Bakugu in this test. Now came the rest of the assessment. Akatani thought he did a relatively decent job with the other stations. His timing in the 50-meter sprint rivaled that of the top contender, the robot-like student with engines in his legs, whose name was Ida Tinya. While he was nowhere near multi-armed Shuji Mez's record of 540 kilograms in the grip strength test, he still marked down a reasonable weight for himself. He cleared the sandbox in the long jump test and beat runner-up Mineta Minoru, a pervert who rather unsubtle enjoyed staring at the female students' bosoms and buttocks, Akatani observed disgustedly, in the side jumps. For the remaining tests, Akatani clocked in decent scores with the aid of his quirk and months of training. Finally, the assessment was over. The class, exhausted and sweaty, gathered before Aizawa, nervously milling about over who was going to be expelled from the school. "Here are the results," said their teacher, getting their attention. The eternally tired man tapped the tablet he used throughout the assessment. A holographic screen sprung up from the tablet, containing a table with a list of names. Akatani had another moment of satisfaction. He was ranked third behind Yaoyorozu Momo and Todoroki Shudo, and ahead of Bakugu, who ranked fourth. Akatani was sure he heard the explosive blonde growl in frustration and rolled his eyes. Kaminari was ranked 17th, which, while not lowest, was in dangerous territory. Akatani made a mental note to help Kaminari train his body and strength. Everyone's eyes fall on the name at the bottom of the list, Mineta Minoru. Indeed, the grapehead was shaking badly, and for good reason. Akatani waited for the moment that Aizawa was going to kick the disgusting pervert out of the school. "By the way," their teacher said after closing the screen, "me expelling the student that comes in last, that was a lie." Wait, what? The grin that Aizawa had could be described as shit-eating. Call it a logical ruse, to get you all to bring out your best. For the fourth time that day, the class went into uproar. Akatani, personally, felt irritated at being lied to by Aizawa. While he certainly understood the reason why, this did nothing to improve his position in Akatani's bad graces. With his mind still fuming, he and the rest of the class were then dismissed. The rest of the day passed by relatively quickly. At the last bell, the students of Class 1A departed for home, saying goodbye to new acquaintances and going on their separate ways. Among them, Akatani and Kaminari walked to the station together, conversing about the day's events. "Man, today was something else. It's only the first day, but already I'm leaning towards a dislike for Aizawa-sensei. He's hella weird, but maybe things will get better? Who knows?" The two continued walking in comfortable silence. "Hey, Akatani." "Yeah. What's the possibility of another surprise tomorrow?" "I have no clue," the purple-haired teen replied. "For all we know, we could end up with All Might as our teacher." "Man, that would be a surprise," Kaminari remarked. As the two friends arrived at the station, little did they both know that Akatani had just jinxed things for the coming day. Chapter 7, Battle Trial by Karma. The next day witnessed Akatani follow through the exact same morning routine he underwent the day before, followed by the same commute to UA Station, where he'd meet up with Kaminari. The two friends would then make the short trek to the campus and slip into their classroom with little announcement. "Oh hey, it's you." Though like the day before, Akatani would not find any peace this morning before class started. He barely stifled an annoyed groan as the student with spiked-up red hair, Kirishima Ijiru, if he remembered correctly, slid into Bakugu's empty seat in front of him and faced him. "What is it? You were really awesome yesterday," Kirishima gushed, like, super cool and manly. "I didn't know electricity could be so powerful." "Well, now you know," Akatani replied coolly. "Now what is that you want, other than being an absolute annoyance?" Kirishima reeled back. "Geez, dude, what's with the cold shoulder? We already have one Ice King with Todoroki in this class." "Nah, it's cool," Kaminari butted in. "You'll have to excuse my bro here. He is another Ice King that threatens to freeze us over, like Todoroki. I'm still trying to thaw his frozen heart to prevent such a fate." "Well, you want to get an extra hand in that," Kirishima offered cheekily. "I'm sure that beneath those layers of ice is a fellow bro screaming to get out and show off his manliness." Kaminari laughed as Akatani facepalmed and released that groan that he had been stifling. While he had no qualms against Kaminari making jokes at his expense, he was still annoyed that Kirishima was trying to barge into his social sphere uninvited and unannounced. Damn it. When are people going to understand that he was supposed to be the one to decide who should be let in and who should be kept out? Oi, shitty hair. Get the fuck out of my seat. And here comes the resident angry child. While Kirishima's unwarranted presence was annoying, the redhead did not deserve to be subjected to such verbal abuse, thought Akatani. And so, the irritated Ice King turned his ire on the temperamental blonde. That's rich, coming from the guy who looks like he doesn't know the existence of conditioner. Silence followed, interrupted by a snicker somewhere in the class. He's not wrong, though. Morning classes went by without any major surprises. After homeroom, where Aizawa stopped Bakugu from exploding Akatani's head off in his rage, the class had English lessons with Present Mic, followed by modern literature with Cementos. English was pretty easy for Akatani, who was fluent in the language thanks to his daily followings of American heroes on the internet. Modern literature was a bit more of bore, but it wasn't too difficult on the plus side. Lunch came after. Akatani and Kaminari bagged a table for themselves and tucked into the food prepared by pro hero and chef, Lunch Rush. And damn, was the food to die for, thought a satisfied Ice King as they returned back to class for their next period, Hero Basic Training. The two friends took their seats just as the bell rang. Kaminari took to gazing out the window, while Akatani rested his chin against his palm, the other hand drumming absent-mindedly against the desk. Akatani silently eavesdropped on the conversations taking place elsewhere in the room, mostly on about what Hero Basic Training was going to entail and who their teacher was going to be. Frankly, he had a strange feeling ever since he made that offhand comment about All Might being their teacher. That just like in previous occasions, he had jinxed the proceedings towards actually having All Might as their teacher for the Hero Basic Training period. But that was unlikely to happen, right? After all Might is the country's #1 hero. He wouldn't have time to be a teacher while being a professional hero. Right? I am. Akatani's heart sank. Oh, for fuck's sakes. There leaning through the doorway in his buff, muscled glory was All Might, dressed in his hero suit from the Silver Age. Coming through the door like a regular person. Akatani bashed his forehead against his desk, his groans overshadowed by the excited ramblings of his classmates. Holy shit, it's All Might. He's our teacher? That's insane. The symbol of peace strode up to the teacher's podium, turning to address the class. In Hero Basic Training, you will learn the fundamental basics of being a hero through a series of trials. So for today, we will be holding. Akatani peeled his forehead off his desk, just as All Might dramatically produced a card with the word battle in stylized, capital letters. Battle trials. That caught Akatani's attention. Even though he was nowhere near the levels of excited curiosity of his classmates, he did wonder what they were going to be doing in this trial. Also, All Might continued, you will be needing these. Right on cue with his words, for slots on the wall behind him opened. Each was a cabinet holding 5 metal cases with a number stamped on the lids. Your costumes tailored based on your requests and to best suit your quirks. So that's why that wanted us to send in the designs, Akatani mused as the excitement in the class rose. The battle trial will be held at Ground Beta. All Might instructed. Go and get changed, everyone, and I'll see you there. Man, All Might as our teacher, Kirishima gushed. Isn't that something? The excitement carried on into the changing rooms. Akatani, as per usual, exempted himself from the chatter. Opening the metal case bearing his number, he did a visual check to make sure everything he had requested was included. Akatani nodded to himself. Everything was in order. Hey my dude, you okay there? Akatani turned to face Kaminari. I heard your forehead hit the desk, the blonde remarked. It still looks kinda red. A small price to pay for making my sentiments clear, Akatani replied dryly as he loosened his tie and slipped it off. As he unbuttoned his shirt and pulled it off, someone behind him whistled. Damn man, you're ripped. Do you live in a gym and consume nothing but protein shakes? Akatani didn't know if Kirishima was being serious or if he was joking. No, just simple, hard work of lugging garbage off a polluted beach, regular gym sessions, and martial arts sparring. Silence fell upon the room. The other male students who had been otherwise ignoring the conversation were now staring at Akatani, Bakugo included. Kirishima gaped. Dude, that is just so fucking manly. Akatani deadpanned. When you put it that way, most of us are manly in some way. He pointedly turned to Mineta. Except for this bastard. Nothing more than a lecherous pervert. Turning away from the mortified grapehead, he faced Bakugo. And this piece of shit. Rotten sewage wrapped in a six-pack. An unfortunate combination. Bakugo lunged at him, palms bursting with explosions. What did you just call me, you goddamn prick? I'll fucking end your sorry arse. Akatani merely turned away, as intervention came from Kirishima and Ida, the latter screeching about the explosive blonde's foul language and violent reaction, while making those hand gestures of his. He ignored Ida when he turned his rebuke towards him in favor of slipping off his pants and folding it alongside the rest of his uniform. Meanwhile, Kaminari discreetly stole looks at Akatani's muscled form, a faint blush dusting his cheeks. His heartbeat quickened as he eyed his friend's abs that rippled with every movement he made. Fuck, he's hot. Kaminari's unfortunate situation wasn't helped by the next sight his eyes were presented. Akatani's hero costume was eye-catching to say the least. Comprised of a black crop top that hugged his chest like a second skin, an equally skin-tight pair of black leather pants secured by a leather belt with a fierce-looking steel buckle, smaller belts strapped around his arms and upper thighs, a black mask that covered his entire face down to his neck, save for his eyes and hair, a pair of black-tinted goggles, a pair of black leather gloves with tips made from a material akin to steel wool, and steel-toed black combat boots. The costume accentuated his muscles and made Akatani incredibly badass. Poor Kaminari suffered the entire walk to ground beta, his blush threatening to become permanent and his heart on the verge of exploding. It was only when he could distract himself with All Might's instructions was he able to rein in his out-of-control hormones. The battle trials will see you all split into two groups, heroes and villains, and pitted against each other in 2 versus 2 fights that will take place in indoor settings. Unlike the entrance exams, there are no robots for you to attack. Then came a barrage of questions from the class. How will the wins and losses be decided? Yaoyorozu Momo asked first. Can we bash the fuck out of them? That came, naturally, from Bakugo. Akatani rolled his eyes behind his goggles. Will the worst-performing pair be expelled? Asked a nervous Uraraka. Akatani felt pity for the poor soul who was to be paired with Mineta. How will we be paired? Ida raised a hand. Is my cape flashy or what? Aoyama asked as he displayed the sparkling piece of cloth to those looking. Hint, no one. Akatani groaned behind his mask. All right. All Might raised his hands. Don't rush. I'll answer all your questions. Akatani folded his arms across his chest as the #1 hero pulled out a script that appeared comically small in his large hands. The villains will hide with a nuclear weapon in an unknown floor of the building. The heroes will have to find the villains and either defeat them or secure the weapon before the time limit ends. The villains will attain victory if they are able to protect the weapon or defeat the heroes within the time limit. All Might closed the script, and now, the pairings. Lots were picked, and the pairs were decided as followed. Team A, Akatani Mikumo and Uraraka Ochako. Team B, Shuji Mezu and Todoroki Shudo. Team C, Yaoyorozu Momo and Mineta Minoru. Team D, Ida Tinya and Bakugo Katsuki. Team E, Aoyama Yuga and Ishido Mina. Team F, Sata Rikadu and Kudakuji. Team G, Jiru Kyuka and Kaminari Denki. Team H, Tokoyami Fumikage and Azuit Tsuyu. Team I, Hagakure Turu and Ojiro Mashireo. Team J, Kirishima Ijiru and Siro Hanta. Akatani Koen. The purple-haired Ice King glanced at Uraraka, dressed in equally form-fitting bodysuit, knee boots, and helmet. Let's do our very best. Akatani nodded curtly, turning back to watch All Might rifle through 2 boxes with the words heroes and villains on them. He was slightly disappointed that he wasn't paired up with Kaminari, but it wasn't something worth grumbling over. Especially since finding out who he was fighting against was more important. The first teams to battle are. All Might pulled out 2 balls, one black and the other white, with the letters D and A printed respectively on them. Akatani's heart sank. Oh, for fuck's sake. Team D and A. Team A will be the heroes, and Team D the villains. Fuck my life. The villain team were allowed to enter the building where the battle was to take place first. The hero team were given 5 minutes to come up with a strategy before the test officially started, and they were to head inside themselves. Off to the side with Uraraka, Akatani could feel Bakugo glaring murderously at him as he and Ida stepped inside. If his hearing wasn't wrong, he could have sworn he heard the explosive blonde growling as he went. In typical fashion, Akatani ignored it. When we infiltrate the building, we need to be careful for Bakugo. Why specifically him? Asked Uraraka. Call it intuition, Akatani explained. But judging from his personality, Bakugo will not work with Ida on trying to secure the weapon from us. He is the lone wolf sort of person, thinking that working with others is a sign of weakness. He will instead try to attack us by himself. The truth was far from mere intuition, but the purple-haired teen saw no reason to tell Uraraka that. Okay, she nodded. But how do we counteract his explosions? Leave him with me, Akatani replied. What we both need to do is create distractions. Against Idakuin in my case? Yes, he nodded. Judging from his personality and mannerisms, Ida is focus-minded and task-driven. His main goal in this test is to protect the weapon at all costs. It is likely he will be impervious to anything else. When Bakugo uses his explosions, you can use your quirk to use any pieces of rubble to keep Ida busy. Wow, you're really analytical about this, Uraraka remarked. Some people say brawn is a good way to win a fight, Akatani said, goggles glinting dangerously, but add in brains, and you become deadly. Uraraka nodded, feeling both empowered and slightly uneasy by her teammates' words. All Might's voice crackled in the microphones they wore in their ear. Your time starts now, hero team. Good luck. Uraraka turned to Akatani. Let's do this. The purple-haired teen grunted in assent. Infiltrating the building had been easy enough, but now came the harder part of being on the lookout for a certain explosive blonde as the pair traversed the empty hallways. The hallways provided plenty of blind spots and corners for Bakugo to launch a surprise attack on them. They had to be vigilant, on guard for the slightest sound or indication that their enemy was near. A good thing they were, for a mere second later, shit hit the fan. Just as they approached a corner, Akatani's eyes caught the swift movement of Shadow. Out from the corner, leaping straight at them, came Bakugo. The blonde pulled back a gauntlet-covered fist and threw a powerful punch at Akatani. The resulting explosion rocked the hallway, but Bakugo missed his target. With lightning-speed reflexes, Akatani dodged the incoming punch, leaping towards Uraraka and using the momentum to push the both of them away from the impact zone. They landed several feet away, Akatani immediately getting up and pulling Uraraka to her feet. Are you all right? I'm fine, thanks. They had little respite. The suspended dust cloud dissipated, revealing Bakugo, ready to attack. TCH, you shouldn't have dodged, the blonde clicked his tongue. That's kind of the expected reaction to danger, Akatani countered coolly. But then again, since you don't have the basic decency of a human being, I'm not surprised you don't know how things work. Meanwhile, the rest of the class and All Might were in an observation room watching the action go down across several camera feeds on a giant screen. A surprise attack so soon, Kirishima exclaimed. That's cheating. So not manly. A surprise attack is also a strategic move too, All Might corrected. In a battle, a surprise attack can determine victory or defeat. Akatani dodged the blast. Ashido Mina cheered. Nice roast there, man, Kaminari grinned. Bakugo is making his move, Azuichi remarked. Bakugo charged at Akatani, gauntlet raised. You better get ready, you fucking arswipe, for you'll be nothing but a squashed bug under my boot when I'm done with you. Akatani said nothing, instead rushing straight at the incoming blonde, stopping him in his tracks with a vice grip on his right arm. You should learn when to shut your mouth. Idle talk can be dangerous, for you especially. standing to the side. Uraraka watched with awe as Akatani shifted his balance, and with all of his strength, tossed Bakugo over his shoulder and threw him to the floor with a sickening crash, knocking the air out of the blonde's lungs. Akatani turned to his teammate. Uraraka, go look for Ida, and take as much debris as you can with you. Will you be all right? I will be. Now go. The brunette nodded, taking off towards the hole in the wall created by Bakugo's earlier surprise attack. She touched the medium and large pieces of concrete littered around the spot, the debris losing their gravitational pull and rising upwards. Uraraka then clenched her fists, creating a center of gravity within herself, pulling the debris into orbit around her. She hurried off down the hallway, the pieces of concrete following her as she went. Oh hell no, bitch. Bakugo screeched, you're not getting away. The blonde was unable to chase after Uraraka as he was thrown against a wall by a swinging kick to the side from Akatani. Focus, or this fight might end in your defeat, the masked teen taunted. Bakugo growled like a feral animal, peeling himself off the wall and charging straight at Akatani with palms exploding. Uraraka managed to traverse through the remaining floors, taking breaks in between to settle her stomach from erupting into serious nausea. She finally reached the top floor, where after several minutes of checking through hallways and empty rooms, she came to one that appeared different from the others. Namely, Ida and the weapon. He appeared to be talking to himself, though what he was saying was inaudible to Uraraka's ears. Yet at the same time, this was good. It meant that Ida was distracted and hadn't yet noticed she was there. Uraraka slipped away from the doorway, lining herself against the wall. She now needed to think, plan how she was going to pull this off. The debris she brought with her will no doubt distract Ida momentarily, but she couldn't risk keeping them afloat for too long without vomiting. And Ida had his engines. His speed would definitely turn the tables on her and leave her open to his continuous attacks. She wouldn't be able to hold herself against him for long. She needed another move of attack, one that would leave Ida vulnerable. Then it hit her. Could she use her quirk on Ida himself? Uraraka hesitated. She had never attempted to cancel someone else's gravitational pull before. She had only ever tried it on herself, and while that experience had been a surreal one when she first attempted it, her nausea that day was arguably the worst she ever had. Who knows how bad the blowback would be should she try to make Ida float. She peeked through the doorway again. She'll get to that bridge eventually, but first, she needed to get Ida's attention. Which, ironically, he did it for her. Tremble before me, for I am the feared embodiment of evil. Mwahahaha. Ida's laughter was immediately mixed with Uraraka's as she lost her composure at the doorway. Ida immediately whirled on his feet towards her. Oh God, Ida-kun, you are such a dork, the brunette laughed whilst clutching her stomach. The robotic teen flinched at the label before readying himself. You dare belittle my villainous name. You shall pay the price for your folly. Ida's engines burst to life, and he charged straight towards the brunette. Her laughter ceasing immediately, Uraraka floated the debris into place. We'll have a taste of concrete before that. She pushed out her arms. The pieces of concrete swung outwards. She then released her gravitational hold on the debris, the continuing momentum allowing the pieces to shoot forward towards Ida. Realizing he has projectiles coming straight at him, Ida braked hard and dodged the flying concrete, giving Uraraka the window to dash into the room. She leapt over Ida, her fingers touching the airborne debris, pulling them back into her gravitational hold. She released them upon Ida again, but she wasn't so lucky the second time. Enough! Ida swung out his arms, knocking the pieces away. He then dashed for Uraraka, fist pulled back for a punch. The brunette squeaked, quickly touching her arm. She floated up towards the ceiling, narrowly avoiding Ida's punch as it came hurtling towards her exact spot, just milliseconds apart. She released her quirk, falling back to the floor. This wasn't good. Already so soon in her fight with Ida, and she had to use her quirk on herself. Furthermore, she couldn't find a long enough window to use her quirk on him. She needed another distraction to pull this off, and fast. Several floors below, Bakugo and Akatani were still battling it out in hallway. Bakugo had gone all out on the offensive, forcing Akatani to adopt a defensive position, taking hits while getting his own occasional hit in when the explosive blonde was unable to see it coming. All the while not using his quirk, something that Bakugo picked up on. "What's the matter, fucker?" he sneered. "Why aren't you using your quirk?" "Don't say anything back," Akatani thinks to himself. "Not yet." Bakugo released another exploding fireball. "Think you're too good to use your quirk?" "Distract him." "What does that say about you then?" Akatani drawled, dodging the fireball. "Think you can just take this battle with your explosions?" Bakugo lands, a vein throbbing noticeably on his temple. But whatever anger the explosive blonde might have had gives way for a feral, almost crazed smile that stretches his lips. He outstretched a gauntlet hand. "Oh, but I can. You see." Akatani stays silent, but ever ready for what Bakugo was going to say. "My quirk, explosion, allows me to sweat a substance akin to nitroglycerin on my palms and make it explode." Bakugo pulled a tab, and a grenade pin appeared. Akatani remained silent. "Continue talking." "If the support department made it as I requested," Bakugo chuckled darkly, "then my gauntlets will store the nitroglycerin within them, which makes for an even bigger explosion." "Got him." Akatani's goggles glinted. "I agree, but Bakugo, tell me." The blonde raised an eyebrow as Akatani outstretched his own hand. "What happens when nitroglycerin is introduced to a single spark, like an electrical one?" Bakugo's eyes widened. Jade-colored sparks danced over Akatani's fingers before shooting forward like bullets. Bakugo had no time to pull the pin on his gauntlet before the electricity got to it. A split second of silence. Then, boom. The explosion rocked the entire building. Windows on the floor hosting the epicenter of the blast splintered into glistening pieces against the bright sunlight from outside. The shockwave expanded upwards and sideways rapidly, the floors above and below the blast heaving up and down from the immense force. The explosion was so intense, those on the top floor felt the floor lift from the shockwave rushing upwards. Cracks appeared on the walls, and pieces of the ceiling came raining down. The weapon tipped over and fell onto its side. "What the dash?" Ida yelled, losing his footing and falling to the floor. Uraraka, maintaining her balance, remained standing. Then, she saw the window she needed. Meanwhile, back in the observation room, a different set of chaos was unfolding. "Holy fuck," Kirishima and another boy, Shiro Hanta, exclaimed. Their words echoed the sentiment of those watching, eyes wide and jaws hanging open. All Might could only stare at the screen in silence. He had been on the verge of getting Bakugo to desist from the move he was planning through the intercom, when Akatani suddenly attacked and set off the explosion. Now, with the fireball blocking the feed, he didn't quite know what to do. Kaminari was taken aback by the extent of the explosion, captured entirely in high definition on the screen. He was, naturally, concerned for Akatani when fire erupted and obscured the feed, blocking the fate of both students in the hallway. The feed on Ida and Uraraka remained clear, broadcasting their reactions to the explosion. Then, movement on both feeds caught his attention. The shockwave might have dissipated, but the carnage it left behind remained. The floor was an absolute wreck. Large cracks and holes graced the walls, floor, and ceiling. Fires of various sizes burned freely, and debris littered the floor. Scorch marks were everywhere. But Akatani was unharmed, thanks in part to the dome of electrical energy that protected him from the worst of the fireball and the shockwave. The same could not be said for Bakugo, who looked a lot worse for the wear after being thrown backwards from the epicenter. The blonde was barely standing, his hair and parts of his skin scorched from the intense heat of the fireball. Scratches and scrapes littered the skin that wasn't burnt. He appeared to be in a daze, ears ringing from the loud burst of sound echoed by the enclosed surroundings. It was the perfect moment for attack, and Akatani took it. The purple-haired teen leapt forwards, his pulled-back foot springing forth and connecting straight into Bakugo's stomach. The air knocked from his lungs. The dazed blonde could do nothing as he was tossed to the floor. Akatani was on him in an instant, raining blows one after another on his face. Bakugo weakly tried to fight back with his hands, one gauntlet remaining. But Akatani kicked the gauntlet down the hallway and stamped hard on both hands. The blonde could only groan in agony as Akatani pulled back a hand, crackling with electricity. His goggles flickered dangerously from the fires burning around them, accompanied by the ominous glow of his jade-colored irises bursting through the tinted lenses. Hasta la vista, motherfucker. The crackling hand slammed onto Bakugu's chest, the hallway lit up, and the blonde blacked out. Meanwhile, several floors above, Uraraka was also making her move. Taking advantage of Ida's vulnerable position on the floor, she rushed for him, her fingers touching the chest piece of his armor. Before he knew what was happening, he was already floating upwards. He flailed wildly, even as he hit the ceiling. No. Uraraka wasted no further time, not when she felt her stomach on the brink of exploding or the bile rising up her throat. She dashed for the fallen weapon, putting her fingers together. Release. Her quirk canceled. Ida fell to the floor with a loud crash, just as she slammed her palms against the surface of the weapon. Weapon captured. Uraraka shouted into her microphone. Floors below her, Akatani slowly rose from his position over an unconscious Bakugu, his glowing irises fading back into the black tint of his goggles. Back in the observation room, it was dead silent. The rest of Class 1A were staring at the screens, utterly stupefied, trying to process what they had just witnessed unfold. Kaminari looked on with pride, delighted at the way his friend took down Bakugu. Azui was the first to speak. Well, that was certainly something, Karo. All Might, he appeared, booted back from his own stupor, slowly brings the microphone to his still upturned mouth. Hero team wins. Hearing All Might declare him and Uraraka the winners, Akatani slowly released a breath. He took a step away from Bakugu's unconscious form, but stopped. He glanced down at the lifeless body of his childhood bully, all beaten up and bloody. He wondered to himself, is this what it's like to have the roles reversed? He certainly felt delight that he had beaten Bakugu to a pulp. He certainly felt relief that years of bullying and abuse has finally been repaid. And he was certainly proud with himself that the hard work he had put himself through has paid off. So no, this was not the roles being reversed, because the circumstances were different. Bakugu was the aggressor, he was the victim. He was just rising up with strength and taking his aggressor down. Yet at the same time, Akatani felt unsatisfied. And for this, he didn't need to wonder why. Bakugu is a representation of just how fucked up society is, how the evil rise and are praised, while the good suffer and are scorned. But Akatani knows he can never completely eradicate bastards like Bakugu. It's just not possible, for the world is imperfect. But if he can ensure just one more person like Midoriya Izuku is able to live their lives happy and go one fewer day being subjected to the cruelty of society, he will be their hero and the judge of those like Bakugu. And speaking of Bakugu, Akatani couldn't stand staring at him for another second. The purple-haired teen disdainfully cleared his throat and spat at his tormentor's lifeless form, the spittle landing squarely on the cheek. Deed done, Akatani turned away from Bakugu and walked down the burning hallway for the exit, where most likely Uraraka, Ida, Kaminari, All Might, and the rest of the class were waiting for him. Chapter 8. Calm Between Storms. Akatani joined Uraraka and a bashful Ida back in the observation room, as Bakugu was carted off to the infirmary to get treated by Recovery Girl. After receiving praises from Kaminari and the more vocal students, All Might made a declaration proclaiming Akatani and Uraraka to be the MVPs of the trial. Yaoyorozu explained when given the chance. Akatani-san made use of quite brilliant tactical analysis and on-the-spot thinking when dealing with Bakugu-san, and the latter can be said for Uraraka-san for taking advantage of the explosion and Ida-san's distraction to secure the weapon. All Might agreed. Very true, young Yaoyorozu. However, the symbol of peace turned to Akatani. Young Akatani, I must advise you to never spit upon your downed opponents again. It is unbecoming for an up-and-coming hero to display such disrespect, even towards villains. Eyes turned to Akatani, and brows raised. Apparently, it seemed that not everyone had caught the moment where he spat onto Bakugu, if the looks of surprise and disbelief were any indication. Ida, in particular, was affronted enough to open his mouth to rebuke Akatani for his actions. But whatever words he planned to say died in his throat as the temperature of the room suddenly plummeted. A black aura, dangerous and piercing, rose from Akatani's body, punctuated by flashes of green electric bolts. He stared dead straight at All Might, who flinched at the sheer hatred radiating off in the swirling clouds of darkness. The nerve-trembling sight, made far worse by Akatani's irises glowing angrily behind his tinted goggles, flames roaring wildly in the pools of jade and emerald. That's funny. You say that when so many heroes are no better than villains themselves. Words chilled to ice struck everyone gathered inside the room. Several shrunk away from the dark being that appeared to possess the purple-haired teen. Holy fuck, man. Kirishima cowered alongside Siro. This darkness, a bird-headed student, Tokoyami Fumikage shuddered, is unbelievable. Such strong hatred, a heart full of vengeance. The entire room was on edge, the general consensus hovering over whether Akatani was going to explode and attack All Might. Never mind that the #1 hero could literally turn Akatani into a bloody pulp if needed. No one dared move a muscle, lest they miss the moment where the prospective free-for-all was to begin. But that moment never came. Just as suddenly as it appeared, the deadly aura dissipated like vapor. The temperature in the observation room rose back to normal, and whatever tension that threatened to choke all those who had been watching released its hold and disappeared with Akatani's cloud of hatred. Breaths that had been unwittingly held were let go almost collectively. Akatani stared at All Might a little longer, then wordlessly stepping away from the #1 hero and going up to Kaminari. How did I do? The blonde snapped out of his daze. That was so badass, man. You took down Bakuho like he was nothing but a twig. Akatani inwardly smiled, ignoring the wary looks of his classmates. The rest of the battle trials passed with not much fanfare. Compared to the explosive battle between Akatani and Bakugo, the others were significantly less showy. Save for the battle between Team B, Todoroki and Mezu, and Team I, Ojiro and Hagakure, where Todoroki basically told his teammate to evacuate, froze the entire building, and Team I, with his ice, and single-handedly retrieved the weapon. Another moment of notice came when Yaoyorozu quite angrily tossed Mineta out of a window for attempting to grope her, going on to finish the trial by herself. Akatani had no sympathy for the grape-headed pervert, who only survived the fall by using his balls as a cushion. He added another item to his checklist: find a way to get Mineta expelled. Akatani paid close attention when it was Kaminari's turn. As the trial played out, 2 more items quickly found their way into his mental checklist: teach his friend on how to use his quirk effectively, and train him to not solely rely on his quirk. The trial had ended in a dead heat. Kaminari panicked when forced to fight against Ishido and Aoyama, discharging millions of volts of electricity indiscriminately. His teammate, Jairu, and the opposing team were electrocuted and quickly knocked out, while the electricity fried his brain, leaving Kaminari incapacitated and giggling, completely useless. While the look of absolute stupidity on the blonde was amusing enough for even Akatani to find it slightly funny, it was also deeply concerning. Kaminari would be liability to those around him if all he could do was discharge electricity indiscriminately. Furthermore, any villains that were resistant to electricity would have his hide within seconds. Akatani knew he needed to help Kaminari as soon as possible. Once he returned to his normal self first, that is. He can't really do anything when his friend is a brain-dead, giggling idiot, after all. He'll speak to him after getting fixed up by Recovery Girl. The fated conversation spanned over the next 12 hours or so, beginning when classes ended for the day and the 2 friends were heading home. It carried on into the night through text messages and picked up again with the new day after several hours on hold due to sleep. Kaminari, while agreeing that he needed training, became nervous when Akatani started planning everything they needed to cover in order for him to hold his own against enemies. This was the first time the blonde watched his friend go into a deeply analytical mode, possible regimens to hone both his body, agility and quirk, weighing the pros and cons of each, all coming out in almost incoherent muttering. It was intimidating, to say the least. Kaminari just hoped he didn't die from whatever his friend had in store for him. As they neared the campus gate, a barrage of noise ahead stopped them in their tracks. What the fuck? Akatani cussed in disbelief. Dozens of reporters were crowding around the gate, cameras flashing and questions shouted at the beleaguered students trying to get to class without getting mobbed by the chaos around them. What's going on? Kaminari asked. Akatani's ears picked up a question thrown by a reporter. Is it true that All Might is a teacher here? Whatever disbelief Akatani had melted away. Of course this would happen. Kaminari, the blonde turned to him. Stick close to me, and don't answer any of their questions. We'll be late otherwise. Okay. Kaminari's answer ended in a squeak as Akatani grabbed his hand and pulled him towards the crowd of reporters. The blonde felt his heart speed up. His friend's hand was rough and calloused against his own, born from prolonged training and hard work. It brought flashbacks of seeing Akatani's sculpted body in the locker room, something that made Kaminari flush all over, as he visualized every detail of muscle he managed to get a peek at the time. Plus, the fact that they were holding hands like a couple made his stomach go all fuzzy, not helping his thundering heart. But at the same time, it was a useful distraction. Kaminari completely ignored the shouting reporters and flashing cameras, too lost in his fantasies about his friend to notice. He only came back to reality when he felt Akatani remove his hand, at which time he noticed they had crossed through the gate. Let's get going. Kaminari barely heard his friend speak to him. I don't wish to have to put up with Aizawa's bullshit if we're late. All right. Thankfully, they arrived at the classroom before the bell rang. And to everyone's surprise when the bell rang, Aizawa was nowhere to be seen. Ojiro even went up to check behind the teacher's desk. No Aizawa there either. Kaminari tapped a pen against Akatani's shoulder. Hey dude, since Aizawa-sensei's late, does that mean we can give him bullshit to deal with when he shows up? Akatani was really tempted to assent to that notion, had it not been for their homeroom teacher to finally appear in the classroom, looking absolutely done with everything. So nothing unusual then, he inwardly remarked, while whispering to Kaminari. A bit too late for that. Think the reporters already did that for us. Aizawa let out one loud sigh, muttering something that Akatani lip-read as fucking nosy reporters, before addressing the class. All right, for today's homeroom, we'll be choosing the roles of class president and vice president. A moment of silence, before two waves of noise smashed through. The first wave came as whoop of relief that the class was going to do something completely ordinary for homeroom. The second wave, which came immediately after, started with Kirishima quite abruptly standing up, knocking his chair backwards. I'll be the class president. Ashido shot up, knocking her chair backwards. No, I'll be the class president. A chain reaction followed. One by one, many of Akatani's classmates loudly staked their claim to the prestigious role, while he himself stayed silent, refusing to add on to the growing barrage of noise. Pick me. I'm the best choice for class president. No, pick me. Me. Everyone, stop this nonsense immediately. All eyes turned to Ida. Akatani raised an eyebrow. The role of class president carries great responsibility in representing the class and looking out for fellow classmates. Your classmates will be coming to you for guidance and help. This is not something to take lightly. Ida took a breath. We should uphold our values in democracy and choose our president through a vote. But won't everyone just vote for themselves? Siro interjected. How do we know who is the most trustworthy? Ajui added. Then we will see who gets the most votes. Ida responded, chopping the air with his hand. Aizawa-sensei, shall we proceed with the ballot? Do whatever you want, just get it done. With that, Aizawa zipped up his sleeping bag and went asleep. The ballot was done, and the results were in. Several had 0 votes, others had 1 each. All eyes were, however, on the top 2 names. Yayarosa Momo, 3 votes. Akatani Mikomo, 2 votes. Akatani blinked. Well then. Yayaruzu and Akatani, come up to the front, said Aizawa. Both students went up and faced their classmates. The vote has been decided. Yayaruzu is class president, and Akatani is vice president. Akatani scanned the class, inwardly curious of who voted for him. He caught Uraraka staring off at the wall, drumming her fingers against her desk. His gaze then met with Kaminari, who winked at him. Okay then. Kaminari, may I know what possessed you to vote for me? Lunch hour came. Akatani and Kaminari shared a table near the windows, digging into their afternoon meals. Nothing, man, the blonde replied, mouth half filled with rice. You just have the vibe of a leader. I've never held a position of authority before, Akatani deadpanned. No time but the present to start, am I right? The purple-haired teen had to concede that point to his friend. Good afternoon. Both friends looked up. Yaoyorozu and Jairu stood by their table, trays in hand. May we sit here? Asked the newly elected class president. Go right ahead. Akatani nodded offhandedly. Both girls took the seats next to the two friends. I look forward to working with you, Akatani-kun. Yaoyorozu turned to her deputy. Likewise, came the polite response, but other than a glance to make eye contact, no further gesture was given to show an indication that Akatani wanted to continue a possible conversation. This was observed by Jairu, who leaned over to Kaminari. Is he this cold? At the moment, the blonde whispered back conspiratorially. But I've made it my mission to melt that dark and frozen heart of his to get him embrace the light and magic of friendship. You know I can hear you, right? Akatani cut in absolutely deadpan. You speak with as much subtlety as two pots bashing against each other. Kaminari laughed, while the two girls weren't quite sure how to react to the unfolding scene. Akatani sounded unamused, which didn't explain Kaminari's laughter. Yet Kaminari had the added advantage of knowing how Akatani operated in social situations like this. Yes, Akatani appeared offended, but there was no real bite to his words. But then again, only he was privy to that knowledge, no one else. Luckily, or unluckily, as we will find out later this chapter, a loud alarm halted all activity at Akatani's table and pretty much the entire cafeteria. A loud, electronic voice rang over the blaring noise. Attention students, an intruder has infiltrated the grounds. This is a level 3 emergency. Please evacuate calmly and quickly. And evacuate quickly did the students do. Unfortunately, calmly they did not. Pandemonium ignited in a blink of an eye. Screams, shouts, and wails echo intermingled as the students rushed for the doors all at once. The stampede created a bottleneck as students got into each other's way, pushing and shoving in a mad dash to save themselves from the imminent threat. Back at their table, the 4-1A students tried to figure out what was happening. Is it really an intruder? Kaminari asked over the din. Jairu hurried to the window, looking down towards the front gate. It's just a reporter, she shouted back. We need to get everyone's attention, said Yaoyorozu, before someone gets hurt. Akatani thought fast and turned back to his classmates. Guys, get off of the floor. Don't ask, just do it. Glancing at one another, the three students quickly stepped up onto the tabletop, or in Jairu's case, a chair. Akatani hurried up to the crowd of frantic students, electricity crackling all over. He then raised a leg, channeling all of the electricity onto the appendage and brought it down hard. The impact shot the electricity out of his leg and onto the floor. Crackling hard, it burst outwards in all directions, skimming across the floor. His classmates, who were standing on plastic objects, were unaffected. It was another story for the panicking students. The electricity caught everyone by surprise, inducing a mild but noticeable shock to their systems. All noise was cut off as bodies jerked and shook out of control from the low-powered electrocution. Taking an advantage of the temporary reprieve, Akatani bellowed, "Everyone, calm down." All eyes were now on the purple-haired teen. It's just a reporter, not some villain out for our skins. Akatani continued, "Do not panic, just evacuate calmly." In the end, evacuation was needless, as another announcement came over the intercom. Intruder neutralized, Level 3 emergency lifted. All students may return to previous activities, thank you. Akatani turned to the staring students. You heard it. Carry on. With that, he turned on his heel and returned to the table, his classmates climbing down back to their seats. He sat back down on his chair, stared at his food, and turned to his classmates in a beat. None of you stepped into the food, I hope. With the fiasco over and done with, life carried on once the lunch hour ended. The four students returned to class amidst stares and whispers, namely at Akatani, who merely took the attention as inconsequential as he returned to his seat. He couldn't, however, avoid the attention from his classmates. Hey Akatani, Siro chivied into his space. That was really cool, what you did back in the cafeteria. Yeah man, Kirishima jumped in. You got everyone's attention just like that. You're a natural leader, bro. So manly. I was only doing what could be done, Akatani replied stoically. There's nothing to it. It was a little painful though, Karo, Azui croaked at the side. Actually, there's something I need to say, Akatani-san. All eyes turned to Yaoyorozu as she approached the purple-haired teen. The way you handled the stampede is nothing short of admirable, the class president said, as was your ability to take charge of the situation at a moment's notice. I feel that it's only right that you take on the position of class president instead of just being the deputy. Silence reigned for a moment. Akatani responded, I would have to respectfully decline, Yaoyorozu-san. What? Kaminari echoed the confused noise those watching made. Not to insult class pres and all, but isn't what she said true? We mustn't forget that Yaoyorozu-san has not yet gotten a chance to show that she is worthy of holding such a position, Akatani pointed out, which was also a reason why I voted for her in the first place. He turned to face the raven-haired girl. We have only made each other's acquaintance not too long ago, but already I know that you are more than capable of leading this class. Furthermore, we need more female leaders in such a patriarchal society. That's why I believe you should hold on to the position, Yaoyorozu-san, and be our leader through the year. I promise, on my part, to do my best to assist you as your deputy. Silence followed for a brief moment, broken by Kaminari whooping. Preach man, give it up for Yamamo. This started a wave of applause and cheers for the class president, who blushed modestly at the attention before composing herself. Very well, I promise to do my best as class president. The noise in the classroom went up by one notch, only to come crashing down with one grating voice. Shut the fuck up, you loudmouth extras. All eyes turned to Bakugo, who glared back in irritation, feet kicked up on his desk. A moment passed before the tension was sliced through with the verbal knife. This is coming from the guy who is nothing but hot air and noise, Akatani drawled. I don't think you have room to open your shitbag of a mouth. A moment of silence. Need some of Todoroki's ice for that burn, Bakugo? Kaminari snorted. A chain reaction of laughter followed, continuing even when Bakugo lunged for the still nonchalant Akatani. I will fucking kill you, you goddamn motherfuck dash. And just like that, the explosions bursting on the blonde's palms abruptly died. Akatani backhanded Bakugo to the floor, as attention from the rest of the class quickly shifted towards Aizawa, Quirk activated with a no-nonsense look. All of you, to your seats, now. It took only a second for those out of their chairs to rush back. Bakugo took slightly longer, pulling himself off of the floor and stomping back to his seat, growling at Akatani's dismissive gaze. The purple-haired teen was tempted to give the middle finger in response, but he didn't want to earn a detention because of Bakugo. For today's lesson, things will be a little different, Aizawa began. We will be heading outside of campus to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint Facility, or USJ for short. The facility simulates every known disaster or accident, natural or man-made. Today, you will be doing rescue training to learn how to respond to such events. A hissing sound, the same slots that appeared with their hero costumes during All Might's lesson opened. You're allowed to wear your costumes for today's lesson. Just be at the car park in 15 minutes. Get moving. And move the class did. The first few minutes of the journey passed by innocuously enough. Conversations flew from one end to the other while Aizawa took the wheel. Akatani zoned out almost immediately while Kaminari, who sat next to him on his right, leaned over to talk with Siro about something he couldn't be bothered to find out. He was just slipping into a quick nap when a finger prodded his arm. Akatani glanced to his left, the seat taken by one Azuitsu. Yes. Your quirk is rather interesting, Akatani-chan, Azui remarked right out of the blue. So you say, Azui-san. Call me Tsu Kero. Akatani raised an eyebrow. That was unexpected. Very well, Tsu-san. Anything else? Azui tapped her finger against her chin. You are rather cold and aloof, Akatani-chan. If I didn't know any better, I'd think your quirk was ice like Todoroki-chan's, not electricity. Inwardly, Akatani groaned. Azui had joined the long list of people who made a comment about his cold aloofness. Yes, he understood that it wasn't beneficial for maintaining positive social relations. But just because he was the protagonist of this story didn't mean that he was going to spill his tragic backstory to just anyone when asked. Hell, not even Kaminari, the only person he had allowed himself to grow close to, knew his entire history. Kirishima, bless his pure soul, chose at this point to cut in, relieving Akatani of the need to quite possibly lose his cool on Azui. It doesn't matter if it's ice or electricity, aka bro's got a really flashy quirk. Akatani glanced at the redhead, who looked wistful for some reason. Enough for him to ignore the fact that his name was butchered without his permission. On the other hand, though my quirk, hardening, is pretty cool, there's nothing flashy about it. I can't see myself becoming popular with the people. Akatani took issue with that statement. What are you saying, Kirishima? Your quirk is extremely useful for hero work. Yeah, but you, Todoroki, and Bakugo have flashiness and ought to go with your strength. Double the advantage, man. You three are definitely going to go far in the polls. Okay, Akatani really took offense to that statement, especially with being paired with that explosive bastard. First of all, he leaned forward, goggles glinting severely enough to unnerve Kirishima. The flashiness of your quirk can easily be a bad thing, nothing more than a liability. What you see on TV is glamorized bullshit. How do you think the public would feel about you if, when trying to apprehend a villain, you cause so much collateral damage that innocent bystanders are needlessly murdered? Kirishima flinched, not expecting the rather scathing perspective. Azui added, frankly, I don't see Todoroki-chan or Bakugo becoming that popular with the masses either, Kero. Todoroki-chan is even colder than Akatani-chan, and Bakugo is far too explosive, vulgar, and angry to ever be liked by decent people. What the fuck did you say, frog bitch? Said Blonde roared several rows behind them. You're not helping yourself here, Bakaho, Kaminari smirked. Especially with your personality that just smells of rotten dog feces fermented by the heat of a clogged sewer. I will fucking end your smug arse, goddamned Pikachu. Everyone, shut the hell up, Aizawa's voice came from the front, silencing all noise in an instant, or else detention for the next person who makes a ruckus. That got everyone to zip their lips shut. As the bus continued on its way down the road, Akatani sighed in relief. Finally, some peace. Maybe he could snag that quick nap before they arrive. 15 minutes later, the bus came to a stop at the entrance of USJ. The doors opened with a hiss, allowing the passengers to disembark noisily. The noise turned to awe as the students took in the sight in front of them. It was a huge glass-domed building several stories high, the sunlight glistening off the spotless panes brightly. By the large blue entrance gate stood a figure dressed in what looked like a spacesuit. Akatani immediately recognized them. It was 13, the space hero and expert in rescue situations. Good afternoon, everyone. The space hero greeted the class warmly. I'm the space hero, 13, and welcome to the USJ facility for today's lesson on how to respond to disasters and rescue operations. Follow me, please. The students trooped in behind the space hero into the facility and were met with an incredibly impressive sight within. To call the interior massive wouldn't do the facility any justice whatsoever. Akatani noticed two smaller domes, one red and the other blue. Two realistic-looking mountainous areas, one with the remains of buildings and the other a rocky terrain with cliffs, a zone with more buildings in various states of ruin, and a man-made lake with a waterslide and a boat in it. All this under one roof. UA was certainly pulling all the stops here. Wow, it's like Universal Studios Japan, Kaminari exclaimed in awe. Akatani had to agree with him on that. USJ is equipped to simulate all types of disasters. Here, We have a conflagration zone, a downpour zone, flood zone, ruins zone, mountain zone, and landslide zone. Everything is built to scale and realistic accuracy, 13 explained. As his classmates took in their surroundings with various degrees of awe, or none of it, for some, Akatani noticed Aizawa approach the space hero, speaking in hushed tones. He wasn't able to pick up most of what the teachers were saying, but he did catch All Might, absence, and 13 raising 3 fingers. Connecting the dots, Akatani concluded that All Might was supposed to be part of today's lesson, but had reached his time limit and was unable to make it. He knew what that meant. He hadn't forgotten that fateful moment on that skyscraper rooftop. And might as well, Akatani wasn't sure if he could trust himself to be around that smiling symbol of peace without losing his shit. Anyway, 13 got everyone's attention again. Before we proceed with today's lesson, there is something you all need to be aware about. Everyone was all ears. Quirks are powerful things, and if used wrongly, can cause untold damage and destruction. For example, my quirk, Black Hole, allows me to suck in and destroy any matter that has an atomic structure. While I solely dedicate my quirk to rescue work, you can see how easily it can be used to kill people. Dead silence. I hope that you learn that your quirks are not meant for violence, and you will understand your roles as future heroes is to help others, not fight needlessly. The silence lasted a moment longer before being destroyed by Ida clapping loudly. Bravo! Well said, 13 Sensei. The space hero bowed modestly as the class applauded and cheered for them. Akatani joined in on the clapping, though his mind was elsewhere. What 13 said made a lot of sense. However, Akatani knew that this important lesson wouldn't register in the minds of certain classmates of his, if a certain explosive blonde glaring off to the side was any indication. Furthermore, despite making sense, 13's words left the ground open for plenty of gray areas to form, questions with no easy answers to, debates with no end in sight. Akatani wondered how these issues were to be tackled. The lights in the dome flickered. Akatani snapped out of his musings, eyes staring at the fountain in the middle of the dome. There was a swirling, black mass hovering near the fountain. It grew bigger and bigger until it spanned the distance between the flood and landslide zones. Then, from the swirling abyss, out stretched a pale hand, followed by a body covered in severed hands. Then came more, and more. Akatani's breath hitched. Is this part of the simulation? He heard Kirishima ask. No, this was not part of the lesson. 13. Protect the students. Aizawa shouted. They were being invaded by villains. Chapter 9. All hell breaks loose. 13. Protect the students. Aizawa shouted. Confusion gave way to guarded horror, as dozens, maybe hundreds, of villains poured out of the swirling dark mass like an advancing army and gathered in the central plaza below them, led by the person covered in severed hands, another who seemed to be made of dark mist and had glowing yellow eyes. Plus this hulking monstrosity with an exposed brain with exposed eyes amidst the brain matter. Who are they? Kaminari blanched. Villains, all of them, Akatani replied, tone deadly serious. No way, Ochako gasped. The one covered in severed hands looked around with almost childlike curiosity. That's strange, All Might is not here. That's not right. Our information said he would be here today. The villain turned to the students, and Akatani caught a flash of madness in his exposed eye. But maybe he'll come running if we take out his pride and joy. Aizawa jumped down to face the first line of villains, easily taking them out with his quirk and capture weapon. 13, meanwhile, began herding the students towards the doors, when suddenly, the same black mist materializes out of thin air, getting in the way of the exit and trapping them. The same glowing yellow eyes appeared in the mist, startling several of students. Good afternoon, a dark voice echoed around them. I am Kurojairi, and we are the League of Villains. We beseech your forgiveness in interrupting your lesson, but we came here today to rid the land of the symbol of peace, All Might. K-Kill All Might. Ashido stuttered in horror. The eyes shifted from right to left. Yet for some reason, All Might isn't here. Was there a change of plans? In such a tense scenario, Akatani knew the worst thing to possibly do was to go all Leroy Jenkins and attack Kurogyri. Unfortunately, a certain explosive blonde decided to be the dumbass that he was and lose his cool as per usual. You fucking shitrag. Dot. Bakugu and O. Akatani's words fell on deaf ears as the blonde and Kirishima, for some reason, lunged at the mist villain with explosive and rock-hard attacks. As expected, the attacks had no effect on Kurogyri, who merely blinked at the sudden acts of aggression against him. My word, that was unexpected, the villain scoffed. I didn't expect the next generation of heroes to be so brash and aggressive, so eager to fight. Akatani didn't like where Kurogyri was heading here. Well, I have my duty to perform, and I'm sure our lackeys will be thrilled to fight with you lot. The mist expanded, and before anyone could react, it had begun to circle around the students and surge into them. Akatani tried to reach for Kaminari when the ground below them shifted and seemed to disappear. The last thing Akatani remembered amidst the shouts and screams of his classmates was falling through the swirling mist into darkness. The darkness gave way to light. Akatani felt himself falling through the air, everything spinning. Then came the impact, the splash, and suddenly, water everywhere. He plummeted through limply, before coming to a stop, suspended several feet below the surface. It took a second for his senses to come back and get him to notice that he was underwater, with limited oxygen in his lungs. Akatani flailed a little in an attempt to right himself and swim to the surface, when suddenly, something shot past, barely missing him by an inch. The afterburst of water sent him spinning in the wake. Pushing himself upright, Akatani turned just in time to see the thing that almost crashed into him, a figure who looked like an anthropomorphic shark, slide to a halt not far away. Akatani knew he was in deep shit. The shark person charged at him again. Only kicking out of the way saved him from those sharp, ferocious teeth that glistened from the light above. Akatani knew he had to fight back, or else he'd be reduced to a cloud of blood and body parts at the jaws of this villain. But his lungs were beginning to strain from the lack of oxygen flow, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold his breath. The shark villain making his return, not helping matters at all. Someone help me. Something shot past his right. It struck the shark villain right in the head with the force of a Shinkansen, propelling him away, deeper into the water and out of sight. Akatani, who by this stage was losing oxygen fast and dark spots beginning to cloud his vision, felt something wrapped tightly around his waist. The world suddenly began to accelerate as he was bodily rushed up to the surface. Water gave way to precious oxygen with a splash. Akatani took deep, desperate breaths, mind still spinning wildly from the sudden change of pressure and intake of oxygen. Half dazed, he felt whatever had wrapped around him gently place him on a hard, dry surface, before unwrapping and retracting away. There he lay, on his side, mask down, hacking up water that managed to get into his lungs from his near brush with death. As he slowly regained the strength to pick himself up, he heard the water break again, followed by a louder, much harsher thud not too far from his position and a quiet groan. Akatani realized, as he stood up, he was on a yacht in the middle of the shipwreck zone. With him was a dazed Mineta, and climbing onto the yacht was Azui. You okay, Akatani-chan? I think so, he replied. Was it you who saved me? Yes, Karo. Azui nodded. You were in trouble. You have my thanks for that, Akatani nodded. But clearly, the shark villain isn't the only one we have to worry about. Both students turned to the water. Heads began popping up, one by one, around the yacht. More villains, including the shark one who nearly did Akatani in. Fresh meat, one that resembled a crocodile cackled. Easy bait, another cheered. Akatani raised an eyebrow. Dangerous as these villains might be in numbers, they were just low-level thugs, more brawn than brain. Numbers to intimidate, expendable, mere cannon fodder in the overall plan. Speaking of plan, Akatani needed to know what was going on. You think we're just easy pickings? Clearly your leaders didn't plan this properly. At the villain's confusion, Akatani spread his arms wide. Look around, water as far as the eye can see, suited for your quirks, no doubt. But what your leaders didn't bother to take into consideration. He pulled his arms in, producing crackles of green electricity. The confused villains immediately blanched in horror. That I have an electric quirk. Akatani inwardly smirked at the terrified villains. So now, unless you want me to discharge potentially lethal amounts of electricity into the water and electrocute you all into smoldering crisps, you lot better tell me what the hell is going on here. Who is that blue-haired hand-covered son of a bitch and that giant monstrosity with the beak? As if we'd tell you. One foolhardy villain tried to put up a defiant front. Oh well, guess you really don't value your pitiful lives then, Akatani shrugged, the crackling electricity growing stronger. Wait. We'll tell. A villain with a piranha head intervened. Akatani willed the electricity away and lowered his arms. Start talking, then. The handman's Shigaraki Tamura. He came with this thing called a Numu to kill All Might. And what is this Numu? Asked Akatani. We don't know. Just some genetically engineered being made to match All Might. That's all we were told by Shigaraki, another villain added quickly. Akatani pondered what was said. A genetically engineered being? And it has the capability to take on All Might and possibly kill him? This was something worth seeing for himself. All Might was the #1 hero, but even he isn't invincible, if his memory as Midoriya on the skyscraper rooftop served him well. By implication, though, this Numa thing wasn't invincible either. But that later. Now he had to deal with these useless underlings. Your willingness to talk might have just saved your lives. I'll give you that. Akatani could almost see the relief wash over the villains' faces, thinking that they were spared from the pain of electricity. How wrong they were. Oh, by the way, Akatani said, catching the villain's attention, I lied. Before anyone could fully compute what he just said, let alone attempt to swim away, he shot his arm out. Electricity crackled and blasted from his outstretched hand into the water. The screams of the villains echoed around the dome. They jerked, flailed, and danced about like stringed puppets as the electricity traveled through the water, electrocuting them and disrupting all basic function in their systems. Azui watched in silent horror as smoke began to rise from the charring bodies, eyes losing the life within them. She quickly rushed to her classmate, grabbing his upper arm. Please, Akatani-chan, stop this. This is too much. On cue, the electricity dissipated and the purple-haired teen retracted his hand. Only because you said so, Tsu-san. She turned to the villains with stricken eyes. The villains were floating face up or down, motionless on the water's surface, smoldering and somewhat charred. Some were groaning quietly, others were silent. Several twitched involuntarily from the residual electricity still rattling their nerves. Azui couldn't believe the brutality committed before her. Tsu-san, we need to go. She quickly realized that Akatani had pulled away from her grasp. He was by the still-dazed Mineta, dragging him by the ankle. His hand was outstretched. She felt justifiably reluctant to take his hand, seeing how he callously electrocuted those villains not mere moments prior. I only hurt those who deserve it, said Akatani, as if reading her thoughts. You are far from worthy of such a fate, Tizan. And besides, I only knocked the villains out. They aren't dead. It took another moment, but Azui eventually relented. She went forth and took her classmate's outstretched hand. Hold on tight. There was a flash of light and a crack like lightning. Akatani took off from the deck of yacht, Azui in one hand, Mineta by the ankle in the other, leaving behind the lifeless bodies of the villains who stood no chance against the power of electricity. Coming to a landing at the edge of the man-made lake, Akatani tossed Mineta to the ground and gently released his hand from Azui's. What now, Akatani-chan? The purple-haired teen scanned the scene before them. Up ahead was the central plaza where the villains had first come through Kurogiri's portal. Aizawa was still battling the low-level thugs by the fountain. Their teacher, despite the multitudes of villains all coming for him, appeared to be holding his own. That is, until he noticed Shigaraki lunge for Aizawa. His eyes went wide behind his goggles. The hand-covered villain grabbed the underground hero's elbow. Just like that, The fabric of his hero suit peeled away and disintegrated before Akatani's eyes. Aizawa's skin was just beginning to peel away too when he managed to pull himself from Shigaraki's grip. Handyman's got a disintegration quirk. Requires all 5 fingers to be in contact before activation, Akatani thought to himself. Any further analysis of Shigaraki's quirk had to be put on hold when, apparently on the hand-covered villain's command, the Numu pummeled Aizawa to the ground, the sound of bones breaking audible to Akatani's ears. The Numu peeled Aizawa off the ground by the hair and slammed him back down again. Akatani's eyes narrowed. Not on his watch. Tsuyu-san, stay with Mineta. Hide yourselves and get ready. Akatani-chan, you can't be serious. I am dead serious, Tsuyu-san. I have officially lost my shite on this. Before Azui could stop him, Akatani hurtled towards the central plaza, electricity crackling madly around him. Aizawa groaned in agony. Pain threatened to cloud his consciousness. His elbow was damaged by Shigaraki's quirk, his other arm broken by the Numu. And there was so much blood everywhere, staining his face and the ground in puddles. More of the crimson liquid flowed, as the Numu continued to pound him into the forming crater beneath him. Shigaraki was laughing like a child, an insane one for that matter. You can feel it, can you, Eraserhead? This is the power that matches your precious symbol of peace. How does it feel to be the test dummy for the weapon that will, once for all, kill All Might? Aizawa gritted against the pain. He wouldn't deign to give this villain a reply, especially not when the Numu was raising him up to slam him back down again. Then, there was a loud crack. 1. As homeroom teacher heard Shigaraki yelp, and the Numu let out an inhuman screech. The Numu released its grip on him, letting him fall towards the ground like an apple falling from a tree. He then felt a pair of arms wrap around him. Another loud crack, followed by the sensation of being airborne. The weightless feeling didn't last long. Aizawa felt the thud of boots hitting the ground, and a familiar voice reach his ears. Good. I see you've decided to rejoin the world of the living and become useful for once, Mineta. Tsuyu-san, I need you and Mineta to take Aizawa-sensei someplace safe. I don't know if anyone has managed to escape yet to call the staff. Aizawa heard Azui reply. There's nothing stopping you from doing this, Karo. You got that right, Tsuyu-san. Now go. Before Aizawa could stop him, there was a third crack, and Akatani was gone. The underground hero barely heard Azui tell him that they were about to move. His head was spinning from the brutal attack and suddenly being saved by the vice president of his class. As he slipped into unconsciousness, Aizawa resolved to have a few words with Akatani as soon as this debacle had ended. Meanwhile, Shigaraki and the Numu had recovered from the sudden electrical attack.